to call the special meeting of the Region 9 Board of Education on Thursday, January 30th to order at 7:30 p.m. And our first order of business is public comment. So we would invite people in the public to come forward if they have anything to say. Come to the podium, announce yourself with your name, address. We'd also like to just say this evening is a presentation on the budget. We're not voting on any budget items now. We'll put the schedule up of what the process is for all the budget meetings and so forth, just so the people in the public are aware. It's just a discussion about what might be going on in the curriculum and planning. So, people in the public, any comments, please come forward, please.
Just take my coat off.
Sorry, again, name and address, please.
My name is Joanne Gray. I live at 15 Lone Town Road. In Reading. My two girls spoke on Tuesday, and they're going to speak again tonight. But this is my second year in a row addressing the Board of Ed regarding possible cuts to the Latin program here at Barlow. Like I said last year, I have two daughters, and they love to learn. They're lifelong learners. One's a sophomore here this year, and the other one's a rising freshman. She's coming from John Reed. They're both excellent students, and they have many interests, but one of their passions really is Latin. It's influenced their lives in many, many ways from a very young age. Latin is a language that they chose to study because they love the culture that it represents. And it was offered by John Reed when they were first introduced to a foreign language there in 5th grade. They chose Latin over Spanish and French because they loved their teachers, they loved the stories that come from Latin when they first heard them as young kids. And they wanted to continue their studies at Barlow when the time came. Since the beginning of their formal Latin studies, they've consistently been excited by their teachers. The middle school students were initially taught by Mr. Sater, who was let go by the Reading Board of Education 3 years ago when my now sophomore daughter was in 7th grade. Those students had to process his unexpected loss, and it was tough. It was really tough for those kids. And they had many questions about the survival of the Latin program at the middle school and the high school. And they were assured by the Board of Education in Reading and the Region 9 Board of Education that Latin would survive at Barlow. And so they were lied when they signed up for their classes in 8th grade, that when they got here to Barlow, that they would be able to take Latin for their entire high school career. And of course, Mr. Sater was replaced by Mrs. Young, who is also a passionate Latin teacher at the middle school. And last year, she worked side by side with Magistra when the students from both John Reed and the high school went to the Connecticut State Latin Day last spring. And you'll recall that on Tuesday, Jeff Fliegelman outlined the joint accomplishments of the students at both Joel Barlow and John Reed at Latin Day in the spring. In fact, Latin Day is still a topic of conversation at my house today, and the t-shirts and other stuff that they got from that day are worn and used on almost a daily basis in my house. Of course, Mrs. Young is now on maternity leave, and the middle school students are now being taught by Magistra, and they love her. And there is intention for those kids at the middle school to be able to take Latin here at the high school. My high schooler also loves Magistra. In fact, every student who spoke here on Tuesday night said something similar. Everybody loves her, and they love Latin. My rising freshman and the others, John Reed and Helen Keller, because there are students there who, while they might not get to take it there, still are very much interested in taking it here at the high school. They should be afforded the opportunity to study Latin here at Barlow. They started their studies with assurance that they would be able to study Latin in high school. Also, Magistra is a life-changing teacher, and from what we heard on Tuesday, it appears that Latin is a favorite of the students who are fortunate enough to take one of her classes. In fact, I would venture to guess that Magistra, or Latin, will be an answer when you are forced to fill out one of those security questions when you sign up for something online. I'm sure that they're gonna pick Latin as a favorite subject or Magistra as a favorite teacher. And now the story about Magistra and is all nice and well, but you guys are tasked with making a financial decision. But financial decisions have consequences that might not be immediately apparent to any of you. Besides really messing with the college prospects of several of Barlow's highest achieving students, you're going to do serious damage to the property values here in Reading and in Easton. Parents rely on data to make decisions about where to move and where and how to educate their children and what kind of social services there are in their town. So if you do decide to cut Latin, you're not only cutting off a path to college for these high-achieving students here at Barlow, you're going to ruin the reputation of both of the towns. It's widely known that there are perennial budget fights, and they only draw bad press. And this will also draw bad press, cutting classes here. It's short-sighted. In fact, when Reading was featured in the New York Times last year, its educational system wasn't even mentioned, and I think it's to avoid more bad press about the fights. My people, my husband and I included, made the decision to move it to Reading, specifically because of the affordability of the town and the quality of the education. It was cheaper than going to a private school in the city, and the education was definitely comparable. We moved here when our kids were in elementary school, but you can rest assured that we did our homework. We looked at the curriculum of all 3 schools that our kids would attend, and we're pleased that Latin was included at the middle and high school level. We chose Reading over Ridgefield, Wilton, Weston, Fairfield, New Canaan, Darien, all of Westchester County, and Connecticut, and Long Island. It was certainly the most affordable of the towns and states that we considered, but Reading was also the most beautiful, and it didn't hurt that the taxes were on the low side compared to all of those other towns, and the education is stellar, or at least it was when we got here. I'm concerned that it no longer will be. Not only are cuts to Latin jeopardizing our future by potentially putting Latin on the chopping block, you also potentially ruin our property value and our chances to sell our houses in the future. If you do make the decision to cut Latin, or any other class for that matter, your short-sighted decision will cause the towns to lose future tax revenue, because I know that I will not remain in a town that doesn't value its future, its kids, or otherwise. And I'm certain that I'm not the only person that feels this way. Thank you very much.
I'm Virginia Gray from 15 Lonetown Road. Latin has been a big part of my life for a long time. When I was younger, I loved the culture. The passion only grows, and in my 3 years of learning Latin at John Reed Middle School, it definitely has. I want to continue growing my passion in high school, onto college, and into my job. But of course, passion only grows when it's nurtured, and if the Latin program is taken away before I even start my studies at Barlow, you'll not only be taking away a big part of my life, my passion, and my future, you'll damage the future of Reading as well. People move to Reading because of the education system, and if they see a school teaching Latin, it's a good indication they picked the right town. Without it, yours, mine, and all our neighbors' futures will change for the worse before they had a chance to really begin. If you have to cut something, I implore you to consider making a cut somewhere else. Thank you. I'm Elizabeth Gray from 15 Lonetown Road, Reading, and once again, I'm here to support the Latin program. For 5 years of my life, I've been taking Latin. I chose to commit myself to Latin during 5th grade, and I believed Latin was very present in our culture. I still do. Our Connecticut motto, Qui transilit sustinet, is Latin for he who transplanted still sustains. We are surrounded by Latin every day. Many words in the English language are derived from Latin root. In English class, the vocabulary we learn is derived from Greek and Latin. By taking Latin, I am at a learning advantage. If I go into a medical career, I will have an easy time understanding medical terms. If I want to become a scientist, I will be in an advantage. Scientific names are written in Latin. Some elements on the periodic table are Latin words. By taking Latin in middle and high school, I will be at an advantage compared to my peers. Even if I don't choose to pursue a scientific or medical career, I need at least 3 years of Latin to get into any of these top schools. If I switch languages, I won't reach admissions requirements. Schools are Amherst, Barnard, Brandeis, Brown, Bryn Mawr, Bucknell, Claremont McKenna, Colgate, College of William and Mary, Columbia University, Dartmouth, George Washington University, Gettysburg, Harvard, Haverford, Johns Hopkins, Kenyon College, Lehigh University, Middlebury College, Penn State, Pomona College, Princeton, Stanford, Swarthmore, Rice, Trinity, Tufts, all University of California schools, University of Southern California, University of Pennsylvania, University of Chicago, University of Virginia, University of Michigan, University of Pittsburgh, University of Wisconsin-Madison, University of Illinois Urbana, Champaign, University of Colorado at Boulder, University of Southern Florida, United States Air Force Academy, Washington University in St. Louis, Wellesley, Wesleyan, Williams, and Vanderbilt. If you cut Latin, you will be stealing my chances of getting into any of these schools. Not only will you be stealing my future, but you will also take the future of my incredibly hard-working peers. Latin is a difficult and enriching language to learn. I am proud to be learning Latin, and I imagine that my peers are proud as well. We have all worked incredibly hard to get where we are, and we deserve the chance to get to the best colleges. If you take away Latin, the schools that I mentioned earlier won't be able to accept any of us. We need at least 3 or 4 years of the same language to get into any of the highly selective universities. I refuse to sit quietly and watch you take my future. That's why I stand here and implore you to think about the consequences that cutting Latin from the budget will have on not only the students of this high school, but also the towns of Reading and Easton. It's common knowledge that the only reason to live in Reading or Easton is the exceptional school system. By cutting low enrollment classes such as Latin from our budget, Reading and Easton schools will become less popular among parents looking for a good place to send their children to school. If you cut classes such as Latin, nobody will have any reason to move to Reading or Easton. Latin impacts everyone in more ways than we can imagine, and it is your duty as the Board of Education to ensure that I am able to have the best education possible and to give me the opportunity to get into any of the highly selective universities. If you choose to cut Latin, you have made the choice to take away my future and the futures of my peers. This is unacceptable.
Anyone else from the public? Any other comments? Thank you. Board member comments. Next item, item 3. Sir?
Not right now, Todd, thank you.
No, Mike?
I will yield.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. All right, then we'll move on to item 4, right-sizing visible thinking costs analysis projections. And I'd ask, we'll try to keep this, I know we've got a lot of material here to go through, so we'll try to keep it, around the 2-hour mark if we can.
And I want to
It's
start,
another meeting, and many meetings this week that a lot of you have been to already, so
most definitely.
I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Pitt.
Thank you, and to start with a thank you for letting us present this when we are a little fresher than the last meeting. So I thank you all for coming back. You have a very difficult job, and so I appreciate that. I'd also like to thank the people in front of you, and if we could quickly, starting with Mike, can you introduce yourself and what you do just for our new board members? And
Pat Roscoe, Director for Special Ed Services.
Dave D'Angelo, Special Education Department Chair.
Jennifer Damaris, Assistant Principal.
Julie McTagg, Assistant Principal.
Sorry. Let me get off. Motion.
we haven't even started yet.
No, J.T. Shem. J.T. Shem, STEM Department Chair and Science Teacher.
Angela Sterin, Humanities Department Chair.
Paula Panos, Director of School Counseling.
Chris Angel, Director of Learning Resources and Information Technology.
And as we go through this presentation, you'll mostly hear me speaking and Jen and Julie, but all of the people here can speak in detail to any questions that you might have as you go through. So the way we outline this presentation tonight is really in 3 parts. Our first part is a quick review of our values and our decision-making framework. The board, those of you who have been here on the board, this was presented back in August, but I thought it was important to review as that frames so much of the work we're doing. Part 2 is a summary of our historic staff reductions and enrollment history. We've been in an enrollment decline for quite some time, and we wanted to review where we've been. Again, that was presented in March. And then part 3 really is the meat of this presentation, which is the timeline for reductions with administration recommendations in that process of right-sizing. So when is it right-sizing, and then you'll see the way we have it organized is another slide that speaks to the programmatic changes. At the end of the presentation is a timeline of the budget process, and we will be presenting our budget on February 18th. This isn't a budget presentation, but the information that you're going to see definitely drives our budget projections and will drive our budget projections. And we look to the board to consider programmatic changes. So our value statement, you'll see this written all over the school. We have an ER9 value statement. From there, our belief that you see as soon as you walk into the lobby. And for those of you who were here in the January meeting, January 2nd, we saw a video. It's posted online. I encourage you in the community to see it if you haven't. It was put together by one of our teachers, Ralph Giordano, and that value statement framed that whole presentation. If you look carefully, you'll see different parts of it as we were highlighting all of the great work our students do. And it's important to mention that value statement and keep coming back to it, because that really is what drives us and frames what we do every day. Not only, we're on slide 4, and did the community get copies of the presentation? Yes, okay, thank you. These are beautiful murals that are, you can find them posted right outside of our cafeteria. And this work was done by students that looked to capture our school-wide learning expectations. Again, another important frame as we look to those skills and dispositions that we would like our students to have as they graduate. You'll be hearing more in the spring about our NEASC evaluation, accreditation process, and it seems to come back to these, we call them our 3 Cs. Again, important framing piece. Speaking of framework, this is our decision-making framework. Again, it was shared prior at Board of Education meeting. It guides our decision-making when we're talking about programs to offer, we're talking about decisions to make that are financial or programmatic. So we always start with that first column, which is safety. We look to the supervision of our students. We look to materials and equipment. The board, I know, is familiar with our cap on some science classes like chemistry, where there's open flames and chemicals, and so that we can't put too many students in that class. We not only look at student physical safety, we look at their emotional and their academic safety. That is our primary concern as we put together any budget or any program that we move forward. Then we shift to those legal requirements. Obviously, we have state mandates. The board is well aware of all of that, the litigation with the state. We also follow our board policy. That's important as we are making decisions in the school. We look to things like equity. You'll hear Mike when we get to athletic information about Title IX and making sure we're following that. We're always looking to civil rights, guidelines and framework. And then the real new requirement here are our 50 credit graduation requirement. So as we look to put together budgets, we have to keep that in our mind. Will students have access to the credits that they need to graduate? As the board knows, those credits now involve a mastery credit. They involve electives. They've always involved electives, but the new legislation specifies humanities electives and STEM electives, and then students can take general electives. And the new requirement for 1 credit, which translates to 1 year, a full year for Barlow of a world language. Our vision of the graduate, our 3 Cs, plays prominently. We always want to try to provide the board with as much information as we can about the consequences of anything we do in our school. You ask for DERG comparisons. We'll try to make sure that we're getting you the information. So as we go on tonight, if there's specific information you'd like, please let us know, and if we can't provide it right now, we'll come back to it.
Can you just clarify the change in the credits, the graduation requirements?
Sure.
I thought in all of our discussions and everything, we were informed that would be like a budget neutral, that doesn't have any real effect on the budget. So is there a change in that, or is that still the same way as it seems like it's something now that it's consideration as we're moving forward and right-sizing? So has it always been a consideration as we're right-sizing and we're just saying it differently, or is there a financial impact of the change in the requirements?
So we've always had it as in our framework, graduation requirements. The requirement has changed. The board voted in, and the state is mandating, hasn't backed away from their 50 credit. We had a 48 credit graduation requirement. What is different in the requirements, as you recall, when we shared the framework from the state, it used to be general electives that students could take, and now they're broken into humanities and STEM with they still can take electives in both places. So when we're putting together any budget or any program, we have to make sure our students have access to all of their credits. And so if we were looking at our world language and we decided as a high school we're not going to offer any world language, our students wouldn't be able to make a graduation requirement. We have a world language department, so we don't think that would be a problem for us. We will have to figure out how every student gets a world language. So we have some students that don't take language, and we'll be working with Cheryl and the curriculum committee in looking at how to provide those. So as far as cost neutral, students have to have 50 credits beginning with the class of 2023. So maybe we won't be able to reduce everywhere all at once, or we'll need to pay attention to that as we're moving forward.
Have we not determined that all but a handful of our students already take 50 credits?
Yes.
That was
So
what Paula
I
put
did a
About
study, right.
ensuring that every senior has made that 50 credit commitment, and so you might, as counselors, have to get a couple of kids into a couple of sections that maybe they wouldn't have, or you have to make sure that when you're helping them plan their 4 years, they're covering all the bases.
Right.
But you're not, I don't think the administration is saying we have to create new courses or we have to add positions in order to make the 50 credit work, as perhaps in other schools that might have to happen because they maybe have a 20 credit requirement or something lower, and so they'll have to build that, but we already have that, and in that sense, it's cost neutral.
I agree. I think the one difference is that we have some students who currently do not take a world language, and there are some students for a variety of reasons who we may have had to exempt in the past. We can no longer exempt. So that's a small population. I don't see it as a major budgetary implication. And to your point, Tom, I did do that research for the last 3 years, graduating classes. And most students graduate with 50 or more credits. There were 16, 13, and 16 students who had 48. So I don't see it as a huge implication.
So a question of clarification with respect to the world language requirement we just approved last meeting. So my understanding is that it doesn't have to be, the state requirement is that it's world language. It doesn't have to be consecutive semesters or years of a particular language, is my understanding. That's the state requirement?
That's correct.
And then going on to college, colleges may introduce their own criteria, but it's not necessarily mandated by colleges in general that you must take a single language of the same type. Is that? It's so many. Yeah,
Most of the colleges have language requirements. They want to see at least a minimum of 2 years, maybe 3. There are colleges that are world language neutral, that they don't have a requirement. So to your point, there are some, and there's many that we can work with that don't have a language requirement. But now that it's a graduation requirement, we need to be able to provide it for all of our students.
So either way, it will fulfill both the college requirements, generally speaking, and then also the state. Okay,
Right.
Thank you.
Good.
No,
I'm still
I'm sorry.
confused. So there's no additional requirement as far as what we're doing here, other than we just have to make sure there's room in our classes for those couple of students to be able to take world language. But there's no budgetary impact relating to these extra graduation credits. Is that correct?
No budgetary impact. If our budget, if the courses we offer now, we are able to offer in the future, we can meet all of those graduation requirements. The reason, and I'm not trying to hedge it, if we make a decision between the board and administration to eliminate humanities electives, we'll be out of compliance with the state. We need to offer a certain number of humanities electives. So it's a consideration. We'll get into much more specifics as we go forward, but it's just an important factor in our framework to make sure that students have access. So we've worked, to give you another specific example, with the curriculum committee in when do we rotate courses. We have to make sure in our rotation that students still have access. So no, it's not a budgetary impact per se, but we need to make sure, and that's the work Paula does with our department chairs, that we're still offering the opportunity for students to earn the credits that they need to earn. But we are not adding courses to meet a graduation requirement, if that makes
No, it's fine.
sense. Okay. Okay. So a brief review for those of you who are new around the table. When we talk about teaching, we talk about it in terms of FTEs, and you'll hear us use that term often. So a full teacher is 1 FTE or 10 classes, and then we could have partial FTEs. What complicates the conversation and makes this such a complex decision is that some of our teachers are cross-endorsed. So 1 FTE can teach 2 or 3 different subject areas, which is why you'll hear us referring to parts of positions, a 0.2 FTE or a 0.4 FTE as we go forward. We're on part 2 of the presentation already, which is our classroom teacher reductions. The way, although the information on these slides, these next few slides, isn't new to the board, the way it's organized is. So what we did here is we have this organized by classroom FTEs. And in classroom FTEs, beginning with the first 3 years of decline, so we began to decline in student population in 2014. And in those first 3 years, we declined by 116 students, and we reduced 4.6 FTEs. We put down those subject areas. You could see there was a 0.6 art tech. Again, looking at FTEs, that's how we got the 4.6 in the first 3 years. The next 3 years of decline, 2017 to our current 2020, we reduced by another 97 students over those 3 years, and that was 4.2 FTEs. You could start to see those 2/10 of an English, 2/10 of a social studies, sections that were enrollment driven, that we pulled out of the budget. What you see on the far slide is the total reductions in just classroom teaching FTEs, and then our projection moving forward. In the next 3 years, we're looking at a projected decline of 61 students. And by the time we're finished with this presentation, you'll see where we're coming up with 6 FTEs, an equivalent of 6 FTEs as we go through the presentation. That's the general education classroom FTEs. We also look at our non-classroom adjustments. So when we look at our non-classroom, these are administrators, these are support staff. You'll see some pluses and minuses in this category. So for instance, we added an SRO here. We project 2 FTEs in these non-classroom adjustments. But again, anything we talk about tonight, we'll ask you to keep in your mind that these are projections. We may be more than 2 FTEs. This is our informed, educated opinion based on the information we have. You could see also, as you're looking through that right-hand column, between our classroom and between our non-classroom, we were very careful to kind of spread those reductions. We have taken a counselor, we've taken a custodian, paras, secretaries, so we've spread that throughout. We put special education on a different slide because here we don't talk about the full decline in our enrollment. as Patty and Dave presented 2 days ago. I was going to say last month, and then that wasn't right, last week, a few days ago. The population in special education is steady. The percentage of our students with special needs to our general population keeps rising because our general population is going down. We have looked at, you can see some additions in FTEs to meet the needs of our students. And you can see some reductions in FTEs where we are able. They presented their part of the budget that spoke about what is under consideration as far as FTEs in our special education classes.
Can you break that down a little more? So
Sure.
you said that the number of general ed students is going down, but the number of special ed students is not. But that's, I'm trying to understand how that all fits in. So what we're saying is that the number of special ed students that we've been historically receiving over the years is remaining steady, and the number of students is declining overall, but the number of special ed students is not declining overall. So are we saying the percentage of all the students coming into the school has a higher identification rate for special ed students? So just so that we're clear, it's not that there are fewer general ed and the same number of special ed students. The proportions are changing, the demographics are changing, so the identification rate is increasing. Would that be accurate?
Looks to me like the numbers are pretty much staying flat, 125, 120, 130, 120, 114, 120, 120.
Correct, but if you're having fewer overall students, then your
Percentage.
percentage is
Yes.
going up.
I think what Mike is driving at is some curiosity as to why we have a larger percent of the overall, why we don't see a decline in the special ed student at the same time as we see a decline.
Right, so special services, kids can qualify as early as the age of 3, and they can remain qualified through the age of 21. So what the special educators have done with the administration is they're looking backwards, they're looking at our current enrollments in grades in the age of 3 up through grade 8, and they're saying if those kids continue in receiving special services, then you'll see this constancy of somewhere plus or minus 125 kids. It is true that in the last 5 to 7 years, the identification rate in the elementary and middle school has gone up. More students are qualifying for special services. More students are receiving special services, and that's due to many factors, one of them being expanded qualification metrics for who's eligible for services. So this is something that we know not just in the 4-year window of the high school, but looking at the 4 years of kids currently in John Reed, and then the 6 years of kids in the elementary school. We're anticipating that as total number of students declines, the number of students receiving special services will remain the same or go up. Therefore, your percentages are going up.
But I guess to that point, if to the extent that we're trying to consolidate or at least make our programming for special ed contiguous across all 5 schools, across 3 districts, wouldn't you see that with that investment early on that might then decrease or at least stabilize what by the time they get to high school? Or, I mean, knowing the population we know now, if you back out, kids that are going to leave or kids that are going to come in, whether it be from K through 12, you would think the more intervention we have earlier, then if it's that same population, by the time they get to Barlow, that should be going down or at least proportionate to the decline in student population.
Yeah, a student is exited from receiving special services when they're no longer eligible for special services, and eligibility has to do with how they're performing academically. So there are some conditions that, that the kid will never do without. If I'm visually impaired irreparably at the age of 3, I'll be visually impaired irreparably at the age of 23. There are other kids who are able, through early intervention in the elementary and middle school, to acquire the skills or the abilities to offset the disability, and that is seen in their classroom performance, their academic performance. So it could be that that we'll have a favorable change, but we've also seen in the last decade the ability to discriminate between student performance through improved assessment methods, through better definition of how we use criteria to identify kids, that we're finding more kids have disabilities than we found 20 years ago. The state of Connecticut has said we're going to have a broader understanding of dyslexia. Therefore, more kids are qualifying. We have a much better grasp of what constitutes autism. So kids who would not have received services 20 years ago, we're saying, no, wait a minute, that's a kid with an identifiable disability, give that kid services. So I think that you're going to see, you will see that where we can help a kid outgrow or acquire skills to offset disabilities, I think we'll continue to see improvements before they get to the high school. But I also think you'll see we will continue to have many students qualifying, and when you look at your list here, if the number of students eligible for services continues more or less constant, plus or minus, but the total number goes down, the percentage of kids is going to go up. Is that fair, Patty?
Yep, absolutely.
We're also, as you know, dealing now with 504 plans, which are not through special education. They don't come in through IDEA. They come in through ADA. And I believe that we have about the same number of kids eligible for 504 as we do for...
Slightly higher now.
Slightly higher, and we'll share that information as we go through as well.
These numbers here are special ed, and we think you can use them to think forward, and we'll be delighted if more kids are exited, but we don't anticipate it.
Okay. So let me start with athletics. Mike is at the first end table here. So when we look at athletics and we look at a reduction in our general population, and we look at our athletic department, we, the administrators, see 3 ways to look at our athletic teams. So back about 15 years ago, we had about 18 athletic teams. We have, Mike, 33 teams right now. So as we move forward in a decline with our enrollment going down, we know we're going to be making decisions of how do we right size, and I know we keep using that word, how do we continue to adjust Barlow to meet the needs of our students. We've shared previously about 60% of our students are involved in our athletic program. Same metric as special education. When that number goes down, even if it stays 60%, there will be fewer students in our program. So we look at these 3 options. We can reduce coaching staff. Those of you who have been on the board for a length of time or followed our board proceedings, we've added coaches as our number has gone up. Go back to that framework and think that safety metric. It would make sense that we would reduce our coaching staff as our enrollment goes down in certain teams. We also look for that second option. We've reduced freshman teams. We've combined varsity and junior varsity together as our numbers have gone down. We know that this maintains programs. We're very grateful to our booster clubs. Many times we've made the decisions between the board and the administration to reduce freshman teams, and our booster clubs have picked up the cost and kept that program going. So if you have children in freshman sports and you're hearing me say we're reducing freshman sports, but your child is still playing, it's because those teams are supported by our booster clubs. Sometimes the students are getting cut when we reduce those feeder programs, and we direct them to other programs. And finally, our last option is to eliminate teams or programs together, or all together, rather. The greatest savings, obviously, are if we're reducing an entire team, but we know that that eliminates options for students. We sometimes look toward the smallest participation, but keep in mind that framework. We also have to deal with that second column of our legal requirements, our Title IX commitments, that has Mike focused on slots for female athletes and male athletes. There has to be a place for students to go. So that's the framework we look at. So the next slide, I'm on slide 12 now, talks about the actual projected timeline. This is looking at a projection of a consistent 60% of the student population in athletics. What we would expect to see in next year, in this 2020-2021 budget, would be the reduction of an assistant coach, enrollment-driven. That would be the ski team. And look at the only freshman program we have right now are girls and boys basketball. And we would look to eliminate girls and boys basketball, and those students would be in JV or varsity. If the boosters step forward and had freshman sports, freshman basketball, that would be booster decision, but our decision as an administration would be to eliminate the girls and boys basketball moving forward. When it's a girls and boys team, so when you're following that framework, we believe that we could keep the students safe and in line with our Title IX obligations. When you look forward to next year, the year after 21-22 budget, we look to teams like bowling or boys swim. Again, please don't hold us to any of these teams that you're going to see on this slide or any of the courses. It's just right now, in speaking with Mike and the athletic department, where do we see that those reductions being made? So that's our timeline, enrollment driven. If we wanted to speed up the timeline, if the board says that that is a necessity, and we look for these programmatic changes. So in every one of these departments, as we go through, we're going to take you through our enrollment change and then our programmatic change. So we would still see an assistant coach and the freshman sports. If we felt that we needed to, next year or the year after, reduce more teams, you could see the teams there. Again, they're put there because we know the ski team, the bowling team are co-ed teams, and gymnastics and swim, it's a female and a male. And then you could even project out further. The board could consider looking at those participation fees, raising those fees. We look at other teams as we look at a declining enrollment. 4 years out, having 757 students, what might those teams look like? They may change, but we are prepared to say that we would be reducing teams as we go forward.
So a question on this. So in year one, there's one assistant coach in ski. If we remove, not saying that we will, but if we take out freshman girls and boys basketball, is that another assistant coach that's coming out? And then also just going forward to 21-22, with those 4 sports being eliminated, are we also taking out how many assistant coaches with that?
So it would be 3 altogether, so you have 1 each. You're talking about for basketball, you have 1.
Yeah, just, I see like if we take out an assistant coach in ski, but then we're talking about these other sports, what is that equivalent to coaches?
Because you have the 1 ski coach, and then you have 1 coach for girls basketball, 1 for boys basketball.
Okay, so 3 assistants there. And then the next column?
Next column, obviously, would be the last ski coach, because there's 2 currently now, so there would be 1 there, gymnastics 1, boys swim 1 on our end, because we're in a co-op, and then bowling 1, so it would be 4 altogether.
Okay, thank you.
Then we also calculate, and this is where, this is the right-sizing visible thinking. When you get into the budgetary impact, we also look at transportation, we look at pool costs, and we will break all of that down as we get into our budget presentations in February.
Jana, I want to interject myself for a second. I would like to establish with the board that the board has said, show us next year, show us at least 2 years beyond that. But I'm going to ask the board if you will agree that in making a projection 2 years from now, the administration has some hesitation that 2 years from now, someone is going to say, Gina, you assured us that you were going to cut the golf team 2 years ago. And it's got to be, we can give you a very good look at the 2021 year. We can give you a look at the 21-22 year, and then we can speculate on 22-23. It would help the administration to give you this 3+ year view if they had a high degree of confidence that 3 years from now, it's just that. It's just a look down the road. Next year, when you're doing this, you'd have the 21-22 high degree of confidence, and then it diminishes. And I say that because Mike can't really know now what phenomenal golfers there are in the 6th grade, and it might evolve in a different way. It might go in a different way. So these are looks down the road.
Correct. Sorry,
Which
go
is
ahead.
exactly what happened with freshman basketball this year, that
Right.
it was
And-
considered, and there was such a high turnout, correct, last year.
Still pretty
that-
strong numbers coming up.
That we decided to leave it in because there was such high, it would impact like 38 kids or so, it
If I
was
could just
insane.
speak to this really quick,
Yeah.
it's hard in athletics to go even year by year, because not every program has a feeder program. So, and then even with the programs that do have a feeder program, oftentimes, say in a spring sport, there might be the same athlete playing lacrosse that's playing baseball. Okay, so they're playing the same two sports with the same kid, and then they decide what they want to do when they get to high school. So it's really hard to gauge that. And you have sports that are more individual in nature, such as cross country or track, who oftentimes that's the first experience some of these kids have on an athletic team. So it's really hard in athletics to project year to year. I can tell you definitely what's potentially coming up in freshman basketball, because we have a very strong feeder program there, or soccer, or in some cases even like football or baseball or softball.
Ross, yeah.
Lacrosse, definitely. So it's just really difficult to just say even next year what's truly coming in.
Yeah, so I'll throw this out there, and whether it makes any sense, but we have such a complicated system for athletics, and I mean that with all due respect, and that you hear from parents that, well, you don't fully fund things, and then, we get sensitive to that because we think that we do, and we certainly highly value and appreciate the booster system and all these parents that raise all this money. So it's by no means trying to be disrespectful. But I'm wondering if looking at athletics can be done in a more thoughtful way to look at it kind of like what we're doing with the rest of our programming, right? So if in alignment with fewer students, the budget is contracting by a certain percentage, then the overall sports program should also contract by that same percentage. Again, keeping everything in line as we have before, and then throwing that back to the athletic community to say, just use a stupid number. We gave you $1.3 million last year, but this year, because of, the contracting and everything, it's going to be, 1.25 or whatever that reduction is, right? And then you figure out a way to make it work. Do parents want to step up and say, we don't want to cut freshman basketball, so we're willing to pony up whatever we have to keep it? Or, whatever some of the booster club. And the reason I say it that way, because it's so complicated that parents who donate for football probably wanted to go to football, and parents who donate for field hockey wanted to go to field hockey. So how do you save the ski team without saying, okay, you and your, 9 kids, your parents have to pony up $400. I mean, I understand it's challenging, but I guess what I'm suggesting is that we look at it these different ways, and it ends up where we say, okay, this year we're hacking bowling, and next year we're hacking freshman sports or whatever. And I'm just wondering if there's a better, more strategic way of doing it that is more equitable and makes more sense.
I'm just going to say, I agree with, Tom's comment. We as a board have been asking directionally, where do we see things going with the decline in enrollment? And with any budgetary process, in my job, I look at lots of budgets, and we know years 2 and 3, you have a little less confidence, but at least directionally, you know where you are with, the students and what's happening in the market and so forth. So I think, again, this is helpful seeing that, these sports potentially in the out years, if the boosters don't do anything else, or there aren't more students, or they don't recruit more students in, then these are potentially ones that we need to look at, because the population participating in those are declining. So I think directionally this is helping, and I think each year we're going to come back and revisit. And I have a swimmer on the boys swim team, and if they go and merge with, try to do a co-op with another town, or they go recruit some kids and they have 15 kids swimming next year, then maybe we keep it. But if they don't, they need to know, look, you have 5 kids. If it goes down to 3 kids next year, the potential is we can't support that program without making some changes.
I think you see that trend where it's every year only 2 kids coming out for, say, boys swim. I think then you have to take a hard look at that.
Absolutely.
Boys swim had 10 from Barlow last year. This year we have 5, right? Yep. So we don't know what's coming in, because that's a difficult sport to really gauge, because of the fact that we don't have, in case anybody in the room doesn't know that, we don't have a town pool.
Really?
So we
There's
don't have
ponds in the back.
So we don't have feeder program, true feeder program, where we can really gauge what's coming up. So therefore, it's our coaches are charged then with looking at Westport, Wilton, just the surrounding areas that do have YMCA programs or other programs,
yep,
and trying to understand who's coming here. So to your point, that's true. Next year we could have 7 or 8 swimmers coming in, and it's totally different. And then on the other side, and I think the board needs to know this, there's things that are put in through the CIAC, which is the governing body in Connecticut for athletics, who allow for co-ops, or something called Team of Ones. And what they're designed to do is allow programs to reduce the cost, but still stay around by usually grouping up with another school, right? So, and we did that obviously with boys swim. We are in a co-op with Bethel. They share the cost. They take half the cost from us, and they so therefore it's 50% already what it was. So there's all these things that we can look into in athletics. So it's kind of just designed a little bit different than, say, the school. The school.
Right. No, and I know what you're saying. We have to give parents, an awareness that, if there's low participation, certain things will go. I guess I'm looking at it more budgetarily in that when you say, maybe the assistant coach from ski in freshman sports, maybe that works up to a certain dollar amount, but that dollar amount really still isn't equitable with the decline in other areas of the budget. So maybe you're going to take a certain amount away from some of the other, because they're all co-funded. So in other words, does it make sense to look at it more monetarily rather than sport by sport? Or in addition to sport by sport, because you need to create the awareness.
So I think it's good that we're spending a little bit more time on this particular slide, because I think you don't want to do this for every department they're going to present to you. Does the board see at the moment that there's a lot of thought that Mike is invested in thinking about when we have a total number of 831 students? At 60%, we wouldn't have more than 500 athletes. When we have 500 athletes and we have to have gender equity, how do you balance that? What do you project? So right now he can say, I can maintain Title IX equity if we eliminate the freshman basketball team and we reduce the coach. If you want, Mike can go through the logic of why did you pick ski, Mike? But I guess I want to make sure that we think, this is the intelligent way. This is what these guys have worked on for a long time. So I don't want to say to them, come up with a more, a different, let them make their case, because I don't think it's the charge of this group of people to tell you what the greatest cost effectiveness is. I think it's their charge to say to you, here's what we could do to run the program with the utilitarian notion, the greatest amount of good to the greatest amount of kids. So yes, one of the factors that you're going to see weighed throughout is, what is the adverse impact that we can constrain to the fewest students? And of course, that's going to then bring advocacy groups in, but say, my kid is one of those kids. And so the complexity of this task is, you have to acknowledge that cost is a real factor in this stuff. Because you could say, money is no object, what does it take to continue the program as it is? And obviously you can't do that because you don't, that's not a resource that's untapped to you. So, the reason I wanted to spend a little time here is, Mike's best thinking right now is, given what I know about the athletes, that Mike knows, we would say, eliminate the assistant coach and the freshman sports team. That we can say with certainty is the least negative impact to the program. Then look down the road with us twice. And so I would encourage the board, don't get overly caught in what might happen in 23 or 24. And I'd suggest we should, let them run through and then maybe come back to some of the things that you want greater insight on.
The other piece, if I can just add one more thing to what Mike is saying, these are, what you're seeing on these last two slides are team-related. There are other costs that Mike is reducing in his budget, so his overall budget has reductions. This is the right-sizing, visible thinking. This isn't the budget presentation. So you'll see some of those costs, I'm sure, reflected. So let me move forward to moving into the classroom. When we look at our classroom FTEs, so these are our teachers that are in front of students, we again have three options that we're going to be presenting and looking at. One is reducing full-time FTEs. And so we know that we have cross endorsements. So what we may see is we can reduce a full-time FTE in one subject area, and the temptation would be to say, oh, you've just reduced a science teacher, but really the reduction comes in a different area because we have math teachers who can pick up some science, and really the reduction might be in both departments, math and science, as we go together. And that's that added complexity, but also added flexibility of those cross endorsements, teachers that could pick up sections in multiple places. We may, when we reduce FTEs, we may see a change in enrollment class size. Sometimes it would go up, sometimes it might go down. We can make incremental changes. Those are those 0.2, 0.4, 0.8 FTEs that we see. Every department, most departments have 0.8s right now. We have 2 in language, 1 in English, 1 in social studies. French. Yep. French and Latin are 0.8. We have a wellness teacher. That's an incremental FTE of 0.5. It works best when teachers are saying, and I think Mike had brought that up at a meeting, like, would teachers want to go part-time, and do you ask them? And yes, we ask them. And if it is an area we can accommodate a teacher's schedule, we will, if it works best for our students and it works for that teacher, those are the best scenarios of reducing incrementally. And then we could also wait for retirements or take advantage of vacancies. So when we have a vacancy in a position, maybe it's a position we don't need to fill again with a full-time FTE. We did that. We hired an English teacher at a 0.8. We didn't reduce that person. That was what we hired at. Our Barlow culture really promotes that conversation. So teachers sometimes tell us a year out that they're thinking of retiring, and that shapes our ability to kind of maintain that programming, and we're very appreciative of that. Again, we don't hold them to it. There's nothing contractually that says you must let us know, but it does help us a great deal in planning. So those are the options as we look at our FTEs. This next slide is, here's the whole crux of the presentation in one slide, but we are going to break this very complex slide down into each department, and that's what Jen and Julie are going to be doing. So let me walk you through what you're looking at when you see this slide. So what you have down on the left column are our different disciplines. Across the top, of course, are the years. That first column that is bordered in black is our current year. 855 students was our enrollment as of October 1st. And what we did here is we color-coded the class, so you can follow that class of 2023, that cohort, right through the projections. The numbers change year after year because those are the Prouda projections. And that's been pretty stable. Those Prouda projections are pretty accurate. What is projected is a stability as students move through Barlow. So you could see as the classes come on, if you go to the next column of 2021 year, we're down to 831 students, and you could see that class in red, the class of 2024, is our lowest enrollment to date, and you can see that decline go through. So then you see this chart filled in with all of these 0.4, 0.2, point something FTEs. The first column is probably the most accurate because we look at the students coming in 2021, I'm sorry, that would be the second column, the year 2021, next school year. And we can imagine enrollment-driven reducing FTEs in this manner. Now, I say that, and I immediately throw a caution. This isn't something that you say, oh, well, let's just take all of column 1, because sometimes when you look at these FTEs, moving one from one column will change what we're able to do in others. So we'll try. I know it's a very complex thing to wrap your head around. I think Jen and Julie are masterful working with JT and Angela in trying to unpack these projections. So when I look at English, you could see a 0.4 FTE, a 0.2 FTE, a 0.4 FTE, and over 3 years, you could see a full English teacher. How we get to that is our recommendation and ultimately the board's decision. Are we going to make enrollment reductions? Are we going to make programmatic choices? And that's where we have to provide you with as much information so that you can get to that point. So you could keep coming back to this chart, but what we are going to do is jump into departments. So we're going to start with wellness, because Angela says we always start with art because it begins with an A. And so we're going to start with wellness because it begins with a W. And I am going to turn this over to Jennifer Damaris and Julie McTague, our assistant principals, who will walk you through the slides. You'll see the way it's organized is pretty much 2 slides for each discipline. And we could stop in each discipline and you can ask questions of the department chairs here, or we can go through. So Jen, I think you had this, yeah? Or Julie had this, I'm sorry.
I have this one.
Thank
So I
you.
have the first one. So the first department that we looked at was wellness. And honestly, it's one of the easier ones to look at and make projections about because all of our 9th graders take Wellness 9. All of our 10th graders take Wellness 10. And we're not trying to guess about the total number of students, and there's only one course that they all take. So when we look at the reduction in enrollment for next year and the fact that we'll have 20 fewer freshmen next year, it looks to us like we could reduce by a section of Wellness 9, which gives us our first 0.2. And then when we look at Wellness 10, 11, and 12, it looks like given the number of students in those years, we could reduce by a section in each one of those courses. And that's how we arrived at, for next year, that we could reduce up to a 0.5, so up to a negative 0.5 FTE, and you can see what that would mean for the class sizes for those courses. So for the 9th graders, it's nice for us to see that the class sizes for 9th graders would be in that 24 to 25 range. They're transitioning to the high school. We feel comfortable for the grades 10, 11, and 12 that their class sizes would be larger, But you do need to know that while the average class size is 26 to 27, of course, it's going to range most likely from 22 to 30. So given the number of sections, they're not going to all be balanced at a 26, 27. We know that. When we look forward, when those 9th graders become 10th graders, we could reduce by another section, increasing the class size for those 10th graders that were 9th graders to 26 to 28, and all the classes would be in that size range. And then looking forward, right, we could probably reduce by another 0.2 FTE and maintain all the programming with class sizes in a reasonable range of 26 to 28. And that's where we hit up against a wall without any programmatic changes, because when Gina goes to the next slide, if we were to go beyond that 0.5 reduction in FTE, the only place we have to go to are the electives, because all of the core classes are at their maximum class size. So the only way for us to reduce by more than that would be, in fact, to not run the wellness electives, of which there are only 3. So they have advanced fitness, they have sports dynamics, and they have sports forms. And the exact number of students in those courses will change, but overall there tends to be around 90 students who take our wellness electives each year. So we really would be eliminating programming, and students wouldn't have access to wellness electives. It might require as well, we've spoken about, we have a transition 11 and a transition 12 class. That transition 11 class is taught by a wellness teacher, so we might have to look at that and how that comes into play.
So we move into English, and when we're talking about English, again, that's 4 years of English, so it's easier to project out. Every student must take 4 years of English. So if we move into 2021 and we look at class sizes for English 1, that's where your reduction would be. That's that 0.4, because it would be 2 sections. There it is. And again, we're going with the average class size, the mean, 24, 22, 23, 23. As Julie stated, that means you'll have some classes that might be 19, and then you might have a class that's 26 as we go through those 8 sections. When we move into 21, 22, we did it the same way. You can find a 0.2, and it's just how the class sizes fall moving forward. You'd actually be adding back in English 1, and then finding 2.2s moving forward. That's the magic of the department chairs, okay? And what they're doing is they're looking at numbers and seeing, we're on a cusp. I can't break my class of 34 into 17, 17. How can I do these things? How can I mix it up? So we move to, okay, now if we had to make a programmatic change. We don't have a lot of electives in English. Really, we have college reading and college writing. Those are our electives, and then we flex a teacher into theater. We call the second part of English 4 electives because we allow students to choose. In English 3, we call them elective English, but they're required English. We need those sections, and those sections tend to run big. So if we were to compress, and we took 0.8 all at once, the class size, this would be, you know, the mean, 24 for English 1, 25 for English 2, 26 for English 3 and 4. And then I just gave you kind of what a range could look like for those sections, so you get a feel for that. This is informational. And then the department chairs have to figure out, okay, how can we do this? And what do we want? We move to social studies.
Can we just stop for English? Can you give us a little bit of a synopsis of college reading, college writing? What kind of classes are those? What kind of students? What class sizes are there? Theater, is that being offered as something because it's been, as long as I've been on the board, it's been very low enrollment, and we couldn't even run it, so are we force-feeding that to keep something going, just so they know? And then, do we run something, didn't we run like a children's literature class or stuff like that? Are those English classes, or those electives, are those gone? Because I don't see them on the list, so can somebody speak to some of those?
You can take that, Department
Sure,
Chair.
so, we'll take first, so the English 4 and English 3 required electives. They have a little bit of choice, but they run at 25, 26. That's what they're running right now. So they have to, all juniors and all seniors need to be in a seat. So it doesn't really matter the name, so that's why you didn't put up there, because they're not truly elective.
That's the children's literature,
Modern lit, right.
Psych and lit.
psych and lit, yeah.
So, just gives students a little bit of choice about which one, but they're all very full.
You would take that like
Theater.
instead of English 4?
English 4 is the fall.
That would be part of,
Yes.
would
Yeah.
be your English 4.
Exactly.
Yeah, so consider it this way. English 3, you come in, you get everything the same, and then the second part of the year, you get a little tiny bit of choice, and you can choose what your focus area is for Part 2 of English 3, and we have titles for those choices.
But they're mandatory.
So how do those choices affect enrollment and
They
staffing?
really, they don't. You would need something there. It's neutral.
So not at all, you don't have any that are
can't
running lower sections? Or any that if you compressed, you would be able to run fewer sections?
I think
can
we
look
do
at
that
those-
already.
Right.
So just a minute from Paula on, when Paula gets the master schedule run out, and she looks at, let's say, English, the fourth year of English, and she says, oh, look, the master schedule is thrown out, that there's 3 periods with 33 kids in each period, so then she goes in and hand schedules, so that if there are other periods with, say, 17, she's gonna move kids from one section to the other, balance it out. So your average will become a balance that the counseling department is working to maintain, so you don't have that inequity.
Right. I mean,
That-
if you look at psych and lit, we have 5 sections. Every section is at 25 or 26 right now. There is not an available seat. So it's kind of, right now, English is very tight. When you look at the second semester, which is elective, but by choice, kids really can't choose. If they don't get into it initially, there may not be a seat. We can't overload to 27 and 28.
And they would be channeled into another seat. You need the same number of seats in English 3 you need in the English 3 elective second part. The same number of seats in English 4, you need the second semester, the exact same number of seats. It could be divided amongst those options.
And
Maybe we need to call them options instead of electives, because the only true electives in the English department are those college reading, college writing, theater, and.
theater's not in English, we've flexed a teacher in,
In.
and we have not run it simply to
We didn't run
buy,
it this year.
yeah,
Exactly, right.
because we don't have,
We did run it one year, but I combined it with stagecraft and theater.
yeah.
And so, because if you added both of them, it was 2 entirely different
Well,
courses.
it's
We
not.
put them-
College,
So,
you speak to the college
but
reading
if-
and writing.
If you guys want, I mean, you can have this if you want it. Angela will explain to you the humanities scheduling matrix. But what I tasked this group to do was to say, first show the board, based on our enrollment projectives, how the staff would be, in this case, downsized, because there are fewer students coming in, therefore you need fewer sections run. That's your timeline of right sizing. But this board is also a board of finance. You're the Board of Education, you're the Board of Finance. So if it became necessary for financial reasons to further reduce, in this case, the English department, instead of taking the 0.4 that enrollment decline presents, they're saying it would go up to 0.8, and a couple of the courses that would be knocked off could be this and that, but we don't know the enrollments of those, so these are these are the electives, is that correct, that would be first impacted in it?
Correct.
Okay. Because I didn't understand it would be that way, so that
Yes.
helps.
Does
Thank
that
you.
help? Did you still want to know about the college reading and writing, or you're okay? Can we move on?
No, it's fine if they're, again, we can talk, numbers later. I just wanted to understand what the courses were.
They're not required. They're above and beyond the students' 4 years of English. So they would take it above and beyond their 4 years.
Another way perhaps to think of that is for the 831 students, the law says every student will have a full year of English every year. So if you schedule just that, that's 831 kids. But kids can choose electives. So if they choose also to take college reading or college writing or theater or whatever, then the enrollment for English goes to 110% of the student population, or 120. So they're saying to keep it at the required 100, you increase class sizes, you reduce staff, and you eliminate electives.
Yeah. And
Essentially,
we'd have to
that's it.
make some choices in that.
Right.
And we have, with the decline, we've reduced the number of electives running. Again, in English, it's only college reading and only college writing. Those are our only two true electives.
And they cater to the spectrum of the students.
Yeah.
There's students who need intensive help with reading and writing. Those courses offer that. They're also for the students who love to read and love to write. So it's a nice blend. And for college reading, we've bumped that up to 30. We're comfortable running that. 30.
And can I just add that the college reading course also supplements students who don't meet the 01166 graduation requirement. They can meet it by taking college reading and being successful with a C or higher grade. So that's one of the ways that students can meet our 01166 graduation requirements. For those of you that might not know what that is, I'm realizing I'm looking at some new faces.
We were going to meet there.
Above and beyond our 50 graduation requirements, or our current 48 for the, some of the classes, students must meet criteria in reading, writing, math, and science. So that's what's called 01166. That's from the state. I track that data. Students who have not met it in reading, one way they can meet it is to take college reading, and so that is a viable course for us for those students as well.
And if they don't have college reading, how else can they meet that requirement?
We can give them a reading assessment. We administer the Nelson-Denny, and they have to meet a certain benchmark. But those are really the only other
So they
alternatives.
have other options besides
There is
that
another
course,
option,
that
and it's
course.
not a large, I don't want to mislead you into thinking it's 50 or 70 students every year. It's really not.
Okay.
The best way they meet that is through their SAT scores. There are state benchmarks that they have to meet. But we have had to use that in the past.
Okay.
So I just thought I'd put that out there so people know.
The college reading and writing courses, though, if they were removed as electives, those are the only English humanities electives that somebody could take, right?
Correct, other than taking a second English elective, but
Yeah, they could
that
double
may
it.
not, there may not be a seat in it based on how we staff the English department.
But let
We
me
could
also
reduce
state-
sections, though. We don't run a lot, so it's not like we have 5 sections of college reading running.
No, currently, we have 73 students enrolled in college reading, and that's with 3 sections, and we're running at about 26, 25 per section. We can go up to 30.
And this slide speaks to reducing the elective, not eliminating them. And when you're looking at humanities electives, English is one course in the humanities department, so there's other ways to get those elective credits.
Where do the AP Humanities courses fall here? AP Lit, AP Lang? I know back in December, the curriculum committee discussed, we had a very low enrollment. Could we perhaps combine them? Or maybe it was another class, but that whole concept, where do the APs fall in this? And I'm suspecting it'll affect some of the other discussions in the following slides.
So in mapping this out, I left the sections that would naturally run in determining the numbers. Again, the department chair, if, there are only 3 kids signed up for AP Literature, that would be ridiculous to run that course. But
we took away from the curriculum committee meeting that one of our guiding principles was ideally we'd like to have the capstone course for each discipline to run, right? So we kept that in mind. In mapping this out, if there was like 30 requests for AP language, I'm a meanie, and I made it one section in mapping out the FTEs. So, because that initial 30 is going to go to probably 24.
But it still sounds like we're able to keep the
Yeah.
variety of classes, which is
Yeah.
what we discussed. We don't want to deteriorate the quality of it, so I know it's
Correct.
very hard, so thank you.
Right?
Thank you for
And
doing
that's that balance.
Yeah.
Right? And when we're going through this, we want to keep opportunities for students. And so enrollment will drive certain decisions. And then resources, that's when we get to that second slide.
And it may be that, so say there's 216 in a class, so you did 8 sections of, or 8 sections of 25, and then you have 16 remainder. So those 16, they need a section somewhere, and if it's 16 who want to take AP Lit, then the 16 can take AP Lit, or you just open another, or so there might be that 11th section, or that 9th section rather, that would be a little bit smaller, but that's only because the other ones are full or maxed.
I'm going to suggest that
But
we
we
keep
move,
going,
'cause we
okay?
can-
Yeah, just one quick, this is very helpful.
Okay, good.
But what I'm still struggling, because at some point, we're gonna have to get to that, because all the slides are interrelated, is that my hope is to keep Barlow consistent. That's what everyone seems to say. We should be giving students the same thing we always have, try to maintain our core values. So when I look at, I know, Gina, your numbers are a little different than mine, but if you go from our peak, which was 1,068 students, and you go to what we have now, you're down 238 students, which is, again, we've been told it's like 115 students is 5 teachers. So that's 10 teachers, and we're nowhere close to being down that number of teachers. So what I'm trying to understand is what we're doing differently, how our programming has changed. Are we offering more electives? Are there more offerings? What has changed since that time that has made the numbers not follow suit?
I can answer that. We have this conversation once a year. When I, off the top of my head, gave you a metric, I thought it was an accurate representation. I said, here's the logic. A teacher has 5 classes. Classes have 20 to 25 students. So a teacher would have 100 to 125 students. So every time you go down by something in the middle there, in theory, you can pull English, math, science, social studies, world language out without adversely impacting it. But that was a rule of thumb that didn't account for things like the range of offerings you have, the role of co-taught classes, the need to run some courses below the 20 to 25 number. If you never have more than 15 kids who want to take, say, AP Physics or whatever it is. So the actual number for that range, when we use 100 to 125, really, if I had been cleverer when I said it, I would have said maybe 85. What's the number of students per teacher that we need to distribute in order to run the core and the electives as it is? And if that number, if I'd come up with a lower number for you, then you'd have something that shows you this. Over that period of time, outcome 116 students, outcome 4.5 teachers. So my rule of thumb was a little high. But then here's another 100 students, 97 students, outcome 4 teachers. So it's actually, that's what rough rules are. Now we're saying we're projected to lose 61 students from over a 3-year period, and therefore what the natural pullout could be is, I can't read that.
6 FTEs.
So I think that what they're presenting is the more accurate number-based reduction. But what Jen and Julie have done is taken the courses and the number of students anticipated, and then they're applying, I'm going to say, 4 dozen decisions that we don't want to unpack for the board. If this is here, then that is there. We happen to know that we never run AP French in the same period as AP Spanish, so that offsets this and offsets that and so forth. So I'm very confident in what the department chairs, the assistant principals, the administrators have done to say, just on the decline in enrollment, this is what we can give you. I do not think they are under targeting. They're saying we can give up 0.5. That's why we're down to fractions of FTEs. We can give you 0.6. We can do that. But if you, and then what they're trying to show the board is, if you need to take more than that, here's the implication for it. But you've got to just stipulate that these guys know what they're doing in building the master schedule.
And the other piece is there's a tipping point, right? So sometimes the numbers divide beautifully, but then sometimes you're just on the cusp. So when you look at this and you say, look, 61 students and 6 FTEs, wow, that's because we hit tipping point. And it allowed us more flexibility to find more FTEs.
Can I also just add that I really think philosophically there also has to be the equity across all students. So there's, you know, the AP, there's the college prep, there's the just regular courses, and when you look at it, it's very complex to be sure you're providing equity for students across all ranges, and that's very important to us. I mean, I think it's very important to us as a school.
Mike, if it makes you feel any better, and then Maureen, you jump in here. When the curriculum committee met with the administration in December, it was, I mean, we were talking for 3 hours about exactly just this. And until a light bulb went off in my head, I'm like, okay, you know, first of all, education's changed in the last 15 years, much less 30, when we all went to school or whatever. Second of all, it's the balance to me. If we wanted to make a purely financial decision, then you know what? Let's get rid of all the electives, let's get rid of all the small sports teams, and let's be a generic school. We'll just divide everything by 5 classes. Everybody, there's 25, but we don't want to be that, right? To people's point about quality, of public comments about quality and having the diversity, you know, it kind of, I'm struggling to hear this, because if we want to save money, that means no freshman basketball team. Those are students that are never going to be able to play basketball in a normal scenario. No Latin. So we have to have a balance, and the only way to do that balance is to accept that if we want to keep whatever we can in that top tier, we're going to have to sacrifice the average of larger class size. So it's not, I would love it to be binary. I'm a finance person, but it's not. It's education, and there's so many qualitative factors, and it's like, who do I hurt first? It's not an easy decision, but you know, I will say, the curriculum committee, being on the curriculum committee, I really appreciate the complexity of having to do this. And if we wanted to make an easier decision, then we would just cut everything that was small, which the curriculum committee tasked the administration to give us those numbers. And what we ended up seeing was, okay, you're pretty much, all you have is math, English, you know, science, and social studies, which we don't want. So it was really hard.
And I appreciate all the work of the curriculum committee and everybody. And I hope that my comments are not suggesting that I want to do draconian cuts. I do think, however, it's very important for you to be able to articulate these numbers and why they are, because I think it's important so that when, you know, people go to vote for the referendum, they see that, you know, our due diligence has been done, and these questions need to be asked. I don't think it's good enough for us to say, we looked at it all, and this is the best we, you know, I think sometimes we need to go a little deeper.
Yeah, but I think they've done that.
But I appreciate that, yes.
So.
And I was just going to say that if you could tape what Cheryl said, it is a perfect or near perfect encapsulation of what we thought about. We are going to sacrifice some level of class size to keep diversity of offerings, and we are trying to be nuanced in our decision-making and not simplistic. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I, following also on what Paula said, because as much as it's important to keep our capstone classes and our specialized things, I think there's probably a big chunk of kids who maybe take one AP class their entire time here, or don't take any AP classes, and they're just sort of in sort of regular classes. And I would hate to think that that very large chunk of kids is going to go through their whole day having 28 kids in every single one of their classrooms, so that in order to maintain our more elite, smaller classes,
But I don't think that's going to be the outcome.
I'm sure it's not, but I think that's also something that we have to keep in mind when we're looking at an average number that just,
So as we forge forward into social studies, and really, we're trying to provide you with information because, just as Mike said, you're going to have, as a community, is going to have to make tough decisions. This is giving you a framework to help make those decisions. So social studies approach is the same as in English. I broke it down by grade level. Again, 9th grade is pretty straightforward. 10th grade is straightforward. I have the American government, but there's the complement to the second semester, that's the non-Western, U.S. history, and then I used Madman as the generic elective, okay? So you can look at the class sizes and know what we could reduce. Now, if we were to move forward and move into programmatic change, okay, this will take some thinking. So if we go and say, okay, we want to go beyond and reduce more than, let's say, the 0.5, 0.6, that would be natural, how can you do that? Okay, again, the department chair may have even better ideas than I do. But if you reduce some options in 10th grade, now you have a bigger pool and you might buy a section. Okay? That's the example. Okay, you don't run debate because now you're manipulating sections. It would not work in English as well as in this. Okay? We could, push comes to shove, say, okay, we're going to limit the number of electives. We have more electives that are offered. We could limit the number and then give preference to 12th graders and say, okay, you'll have to take something else. And then, so those are the decisions when we get numbers that we play out. That's where we find flexibility. Move to world language.
He pushes in here, right? It's just not seen.
Right, I just,
No, it's okay.
yeah,
Fine.
didn't want to get that far.
No, I don't, just want to make sure it's.
Actually, yeah, I've been
Fine.
talking for a long time. So again, world language. I left French off because it's just, we're right there and it's,
You can't
I can't really play with it.
Right.
All right? Spanish, okay, so if I were to project, okay, Spanish 1, we run those a little lower. These are students new to the language. So 18, Spanish 2, 20, 23.
Sorry, Jen, just clarify, most kids coming, having taken Spanish at the middle school come into
Spanish 3.
Spanish 3. Okay.
Okay, so they're coming in robust class 23. Our Spanish 2 is pretty robust with 20. Spanish 4, we're running a class at 27, okay? We have large classes at the upper levels. And then if we were to reduce in Spanish, you know, we'll get some big class sizes. Latin is that conversation. If we go, naturally we'd go down 0.2 in Latin. So, programmatic. And that 0.2, again, Magistra, she for years has been combining levels into one class. Okay? She has been teaching Latin 3, Latin 4, Latin 5 in one Latin 3, Latin 4, 5 honors all in one. Okay? For years, we've been kind of dangling in front of everyone. We're not going to fund Latin next year. We're not going to fund. I don't know what that does to enrollment in a program, but I think it drives down enrollment. Our current enrollment in Latin for all of Barlow, at all levels, is 18 students. So that's not really
How many of them are seniors?
one,
So potentially you could have 17 students?
probably 16.
Thought it was
14, and we did that number?
13.
Yeah, I did the number, it was 14
Yeah.
for,
So-
for next year.
Right, so then if we say, okay, 13 students, if we have to compress, it would be the end of the formal Latin program. We still want to honor those students in some way, online, whatever we create. Okay, when you do that, is it virtual, does that go? Students now coming in from 8th grade into 9th grade need a language. Would that drive up that Spanish numbers, and then we just keep Spanish static and French static as a result? Okay, these are going to be the hard decisions during the budget process.
So that in this programmatic change scenario where there's the virtual language that gets on, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's about 9 to 12, about 20 some odd kids, maybe 25 kids that are in virtual lang now.
No, it's about two sections.
So it's more.
Yeah, but yeah,
48 to 50.
45.
yeah.
48 to
So
50.
so then if we eliminate virtual language, we'd have to find a place for the Latin children and the 48 kids that are taking virtual. Now we're talking about trying to find a place for 60
Unless some
students.
of them are seniors.
Is that-
Unless some are seniors,
Okay.
yeah.
Some of our current virtual students are seniors, right? And
You're only reducing one section.
we're reducing
Yes.
one section of virtual, right?
So I have a question about Spanish.
Yep.
So if
Make it my other cheat sheet.
Reading offers Spanish beginning in first grade or whatever, and Easton has Spanish starting in whenever, kindergarten, and students that come in that take it in the middle school are testing into Spanish 3, where are the 38 kids coming from in Spanish 1 and 2? Are those kids that took French in middle school after taking Spanish going all the way up, and then they decide to switch and take Spanish 1 or 2? Like, I'm
Some.
just trying to understand.
A couple.
Because there's 38 students seems,
They could be switching the language, they could have not taken a language,
They could be taking
struggling
a
with the
second language.
and why don't they
Second
take
language.
Latin?
It's just student choice.
I'm just saying, if there was no Spanish 1, would they take Latin?
And
So
we also have kids
The
coming
same
in.
schedule constraints that you have, in this building you have in the middle school also. So if a student is receiving recess, resources support, or some other special programming, they don't have elective options, so they don't get to experience middle school world language. And then when they move to the high school, many of those kids would get a resource period scheduled, and we have the schedule built, they move into Spanish 1, maybe Spanish 2. Or you have kids that have made a language choice, but these guys know what.
Okay, no, I trust you. I just
Okay.
wanted to ask the question.
And
just
all
to
those
see your
kids are
opinion.
gonna
Move
have to take a
into
year
a-
of language.
Sorry,
before they
one more
would.
question. How many students again were in the virtual languages?
We're running, what,
44 right now, two
Is there
sections.
any commonality amongst the languages that they're taking?
Wide range.
Wide range, Italian,
Italian, Chinese, Greek,
So
German.
out of those
Someone
48
from Swahili.
students, there are like not 30 of them taking Japanese. It would make more sense to teach a Japanese class
No.
than 14
It's really
kids.
mixed.
No.
So it's across the board there.
Many of them take a language that is part of their family culture that they want to really be able to excel in.
No, I was just curious if we'd have that many students taking it virtually, if there was some class we could
No true
replace.
pattern. I have a question about the virtual program. Can any of the students in that virtual program progress and do more than a year's worth of curriculum in a year? So do you have students
It's
who?
self-paced, is
as
that
it-
what you're asking?
right,
Yes,
since
it's
it
the
is
Rosetta
self-paced.
Stone and it's self-paced.
All right, so is it possible, at least conceptually, for a student to do more than 1 year's worth of work in a year's worth of time, if they were a particular student and capable?
Yes,
Yes.
it is
Does that ever
rare, but
happen?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
We have
I'd
students
say
that
maybe
take virtual and.
3
okay.
would be,
But somebody who's particularly motivated to study a language
Yep.
in a self-study setting could, in theory, for college admissions purposes, do more than 1 year of language in a year of study.
they want to get credit for it,
They wouldn't?
but for more than 1 year because of the way it's organized. So it's a self-paced program.
Okay.
So the way it's organized now, it's an interesting question.
Would you have a petition process whereby, I'm thinking of these
Yeah.
Latin students, actually. Could you have a petition process whereby the student says that they've actually completed more than a year's work for the purposes of college, and so the school certifies and says, yes, in fact, this student is particularly motivated and did do more than that?
Something to consider.
Interesting
Good
question.
The question I had for Jen is, are there students in virtual who have gone on to take the AP exam in
No.
a language? No one has done the AP except for the languages we offer?
We've had Chinese, we've
right.
had 2
Chinese.
Chinese
Yes,
students.
so that's another.
So maybe
It's
it would
usually
help-
native speakers.
Could Chris give the board an overview? What kind of online courses are kids currently taking? If a kid were truly, so to go back to Jen's example, let's say only 3 kids sign up to take AP macroeconomics. And we say to those 3 kids, I'm sorry, we can't run a class with 3 kids in it, but what could they do if they still wanted to take a course?
Okay, so, do we want to do the, all right, so we have the ISOLD, which is independent study, online learning, and a dual enrollment. So every year, we have 18 students this year taking dual enrollment. How many next year total?
We don't know next year.
Okay, so, for instance, there's this kid, Ethan Angel,
Not allowed to
who
say kids'
was looking to take a dual enrollment course. We have a student taking a poetry class,
Where would they
legal
take
history.
these, where?
So the dual enrollments are going to be at the community
Community
colleges, which they take for free, so they get a credit in high school and a credit in college. The online courses that let's see who we have. Do we have a lot online this year? Oh, yeah, we get, the BYU ASL oh, that's right.
AP
Yeah, yeah.
macroeconomics.
AP macro, and an AP Latin class, are all on the
I would
online.
say, and Apex Learning
Oh,
is for
independent
AP.
study,
Yep.
Yep.
So, but so let me rephrase it. If, let's say, 50 kids wanted to take advanced online programming with us, could they, do we need to budget for the subscriptions? And do they do it in this room? Do they do it in the LARC? Do they do it on their own time?
We try to, yes, the answer to that is yes. If they were doing it online, the online is for the courses that work most flexibly and tend to work with our students are the ones where they sign up and they work whenever they get the chance during that week. So on a Tuesday, the professor may drop the assignment. The students have until the next Tuesday to complete the assignment. There are very few online coursework classes that are time sensitive, that you have to be in your chair at this time to this time. There are a couple, but they're rare. Other than that, what was the other half of your question?
If 50 students
Yes.
wanted to take an online course?
Budgeting, yes, they do. We looked at, Jen and I were talking about that was comparative gov. Right now, the 2 programs that we have used for AP classes do not offer comparative gov. There are a couple of other online vendors. They're not accredited, and we haven't had any experience with them. Doesn't mean they're not good programs, but we haven't worked with them before. So there are a couple of options for AP Gov, for comparative gov. The community colleges, there were 2 classes, but out of the 2, one was during the school day, and the other one is in New Haven. Was at a night class. It was I want to say it was 7 to 9:30.
I would just say if it's not accredited, we cannot award credit.
So
at Barlow.
perhaps to keep us moving, I'd say maybe the board needs to schedule a presentation on, as we continue to decline in enrollment and therefore can't offer the same breadth of courses that we did a couple years ago, for the accelerated, the advanced, or the achievement, high-achieving student, what's the pathway? I think the board needs to know dual enrollment, early college, online options, other option, independent study, so that they can understand that we are going to get to a point where certain categories of kids, the class that they're traditionally we've filled their need by providing, if that class isn't here, does that mean they can't continue in that field while they're with us in high school? So we'll talk about it later.
And actually, Chris has been working on a presentation that we would like to present to the board about how that opportunity for students to pursue independent studies and dual enrollment online learning has grown. And it's actually a video, not a PowerPoint, and I think you'll enjoy it.
I've made note of it, so we'll.
Make note that it's not a PowerPoint. Music? Yeah, okay, so we are,
So
the next is
music, we're committed to continue to keep the program. We have 2 teachers. Our fear is that if we were to cut below the 2 teachers, that we may be pushing students to seek alternate offerings like RCA that may end up having a negative impact on our school culture. Good point. Okay. The other piece here is if we can't run the sections with our music teachers, we've flexed them to teach other courses that they're certified to teach. So if we're only scheduling 0.8 FTE music for one teacher, they might be teaching theater, or they might be teaching a computer class that they're allowed to teach, some other elective. We'd like that flexibility. There's always the possibility when we go into staffing, if, we only had 60 kids in total signing up for choral music, well, then we'd look at reductions, but that's not the case.
So you're saying there are no electives here, so I remember seeing like guitar
There-
or something, so we're
There
saying
are electives.
there are no electives we're gonna take out of here?
Depending upon enrollment, yeah, we can take electives out of music, but our fear is if we reduce to a part-time music teacher, right? If you take somebody and we reduce by 0.4, that person won't stay here. And then our program becomes not what we want it to be. So that's a budget decision.
But what Jen was also saying is, if there's not the enrollment to run guitar because there's only 6 students, then
We're
you
not
don't
gonna
run
run-
guitar. If there's not enrollment
No,
for...
I'm just trying to
so-
understand if we're creating a lot of partial courses to keep 2 full-time people.
No, because if it's not
With very
there...
small enrollments, let's get rid of some of the smaller courses and reduce to 1 teacher.
but what we might do in that situation, Todd, is we might not actually reduce a music teacher, we might reduce a technology, or we might reduce an art, because there are some courses that when you look at our enrollment and our art and technology, there are some possibilities for reductions there. Our music teacher, if guitar is 3 students, could pick up one of the technology.
Yep.
It would be more important for us to keep a full-time FTE in music, because we only have a choral program and an instrumental program there.
So no,
Yep.
again, not picking on guitar, I mean, we're saying we
Yep.
have 2
I know,
full-time
I'm sorry,
people.
I keep
just don't
saying,
wanna,
And I
see
think the
creating
expertise,
part-time courses to keep 2 full-time.
No, you could end up with, let's say, 1.6 music, and then 0.4, where that teacher is teaching what we call a minority assignment. They're teaching another course that they can, it's not music, and you've taken the 0.4 from other
Places.
staff members.
And typically, you have a choral director and someone who conducts the band.
Right.
It's typically not the same person, so the
different
music
skill sets.
certification is
Yeah.
music.
Yeah, and I hear,
But-
yeah, if we don't have things, we're going to lose them as well, so I understand. Just
But you
making
wouldn't
sure.
have your band teacher teach.
Yep, okay.
So this is where you can say that English, if you reduce by the English, but we had a low enrollment in a music elective, one of our music teachers could pick up a section of college reading
Passages.
or passages.
passages, or theater.
Or theater.
something like that.
So we're going to move on to art and technology, if that's okay?
Okay, so for art and technology, when we look at the historic enrollment in the courses in those two departments, and we look at our decline next year, what's up there, you, again, just need to know, those are possibilities. When we're looking at all of that data, what we see is possible reductions could be made in Art 1, imaging, and digital photo. So it looks like we could reduce by 4 sections, and we could reduce a 0.4 FTE. That would mean probably approximately 75 students wouldn't receive their requests for those electives, but it's just important to know that each and every year we have a large number, 75 to me is a large number, of students who aren't able to get into art electives and technology electives. We never run the full number of sections that we could given the number of students who request those courses. So that's not alarming to us. And then when you go out another year, what you see is it's possible that we might be able to reduce another 0.4 FTE. And in talking to JT and looking at the course offerings, you know, we might not run a section of advanced video. That section starts to decline over time, and it's a course that we might take a year off of. Same with advanced robotics, a section of flight technology, and possibly a section of 2D illustration. That's as we look at it now. The next year, it's hard to know what sections we would reduce, but it's possible we might be able to reduce by another 4 sections, but we would want to bring back, we think, the section of advanced robotics and a section of flight tech, so that you could grab the students from the year before for whom it wasn't available and combine them with the students in the next year who are also interested in taking that class. Now, could you take all of those reductions and move them to the first year? You could. The impacts that we see, it shifts around because, again, you're looking at the entire board of all of the offerings, so you're not seeing exactly what's on the first slide moved over to the left. And this is where, in addition to talking to JT, also talking to Angela, it seems like what we might do is not run the advanced courses and say ceramics and jewelry. Again, this is about having a diversity of offerings, so it's important to make sure you have a section of sculpture and a section of drawing, like these different options. Students would be able to take ceramics, they just wouldn't be able to take ceramics too. So we were trying to maintain the breadth of the program rather than the higher level. So that's, again, that's a projection, those are possibilities, but it definitely would mean more students wouldn't be able to take art and technology electives. So it seems pretty clear to us that you're going to increase the number of students from 75 to probably 175 who next year wouldn't be able to get their art or technology requests.
Though they might go to music.
Right. We're all going to play the guitar.
That's looking at the whole board, right?
Yeah.
Right?
If I can, there's a scenario here, right? If the board were to say, hey, let's move forward with this programmatic change in art and virtual and language. So now potentially if we, again, I'm not holding you guys to these numbers, I know these are rough numbers, but then potentially we have a scheduling issue for over 200 kids. So if I take the roughly 40 virtual Latin kids that in that more aggressive scenario, plus this 175, we've got to place over 200 kids, and we don't know where they're going to go within the graduation requirements, right?
I think that's why it's important, Cheryl, that we know that the more things we move over to the left, the harder this is going to be. If you don't have the wellness electives and you don't have the art and technology and you don't have the, then they're really going to be out of luck. They're going to be in study hall. But there's places that, like Jen just said, if you take it in one area, say we were to make the decision to recommend it in art and technology, or your recommendation was to take it in that area, our thought is that these students would then go somewhere else. They might go to college reading and college writing, might go to the music, right? So,
Or, budgetarily, they might also look towards going to Fairchild Wheeler, RCA, other schools out of district, which has budget implications if we can't provide them with their comprehensive experience at the high school.
Sure. Can someone talk about that flight tech class, just so I better understand it? And I take Cheryl's point to heart. We don't want to have 200 students that we can't get classes for. I'm trying to understand, we always have 75 requests for art electives that we can't comply with, and that happens every year. And so where do those 75 students end up going? And when we say if we did this change, there would be 175 students. So then the question is there a place for them to go as well, obviously. And then just trying to understand the way these courses work. If we're giving students an opportunity to take robotics, and they're working their way up through robotics like any other course, and then they get to where they're really advanced, and we go, oh, no, we don't offer advanced robotics, but we have a flight tech class. You can, in other words, I'm trying to understand how they fit together and whether or not whether or not there's an ability to reduce some of the classes to be able to offer continuance of other classes. And I'm sure you looked at that, but I just would like to better understand it. If that.
Absolutely, so that's what Tom's saying. There's so much more behind this that we could go into it to explain. So, in fact, when we go and we look at that advanced robotics class and we see that there are 14 students, and that's starting to be a number that we wonder whether we run the section or not, one of our next steps is usually, who has requested advanced robotics? Are all of those 14 students seniors, or do they all happen to be sophomores? In which case, if you just delay it for another year, if they're still interested in their junior or senior year, we're hoping it comes back and they have that opportunity to take that class, right? A lot of them tend to be the classes that your freshmen and sophomores are taking. It's an art one, it's an imaging one. It's classes where we're running a lot of sections, so instead of running 7 sections of imaging, we're running 5 sections of imaging. We're not running 9 sections of art one, we're running 7 sections of art one. That's not always the case, because it could be the breaking point that you're looking at something, you're saying, I have 32 students or 30 students, and in our computer labs, we actually can only have 20 students. That's the number of computers in those labs. So we might just say, well, we're just going to run the one section, and the balance of the students can find something else. The flight tech, I know JT has plans long range of what it currently is and what it might be in the future, which is also, again, just knowing a lot of information. What drives us to maybe take a year off to reconstitute what flight tech might look like as a course, bringing in more physics and science.
So I can speak to it. Really, student choice, you have really, I think your question brings up 2 interesting ideas. One is student choice, and I think that lives in every bit of the staffing document and the work we do, is to try to pair that student choice with what courses, what teaching, our teaching cadre can do, right? So, but at the heart of it, it really is student choice, right? But then I think your question gets to the foundational courses that lead progressively to another course. So a good example would be advanced robotics. Students can't just hop into advanced robotics. That's an open elective. Students have a pathway by which to get there, through the principles of engineering, principles of electronics, and then it becomes that course. So a lot of these advanced courses, we start to take those out, well, kids might be working towards that, right? And like Julie said, that was a really good example. Like, if we had all juniors, well, then that may change that calculus, right? And that's something that we've gotten, we've done a lot more. I feel like, Paulo will pull course rosters. In fact, we're already starting to try to, get a sense for what courses, what students are choosing this, and then starting to identify, okay, now if we know how we have these 15 kids that are requesting this, maybe can we look at that class roster, and are there other options, and even flipping students to second, options that they might have for some of those maybe foundational elective, but not necessarily advanced ones, and how can we merge some of the advanced stuff together with another course as well. So a lot of nuance in there, but I think your question really gets to 2 important ideas. Student choice, right, and is the course itself foundational that builds towards something, or is the course kind of an all-call for kids, like an art one or an imaging or a digital photo? So kind of, it's probably not the best answer, but it depends.
And so just be sure, it doesn't mean that 175 students can't take art or technology, it's just their first request, which I think you did kind of say. So they might not be able to take ceramics, but that semester they can move over and take jewelry or something, so it doesn't subtract the open seats.
That's great, thank you.
Math.
I think math is one of the hardest to do. So what you have up there is actually a menu of possibilities. We think overall, just looking at all the numbers, that the most we could reduce without a programmatic change would be a 0.7 FTE. But what's up there is actually more than that. It's just they probably couldn't all be done all together. But the options that we looked at were reductions that would lead to Algebra 1 classes having a class size around 23, geometry classes having a class size around 25, Algebra 2 starts to get up there at 26.5. Honors Pre-Calc, that's a projection for a single section of students at the highest level at 29. It's hard to say. It could be 32, it could be 27. but the possibility exists that that could just be a single section. And then another option that could be available to us is not to run calculus, and to have the students who could potentially be 20 or fewer, that you would instead offer them other options. These students are at a level of math that they could potentially go into Calc AB at the AP level. There's students that should be at a level to go into the AP statistics or take the non-AP statistics, and there would be room for them there, so that potentially is an option for us. But if you go much more than that and need to decline by a 0.8 all the way up to 1.2, the next class that you could look at probably for an increased class size would be the pre-calc. That's an awfully high class size for our pre-calculus classes. And after that, you really can't go with those core math classes anymore. You'd have to turn to the electives, and in math, the electives are computer science. So it would mean, limited seats in our AP Computer Science Principal course. It would mean possibly not running AP Computer Science for a year. Those are two different classes. And it would mean limiting how many students could take computer programming. And so in all likelihood, it would mean all ninth graders, incoming ninth graders wouldn't have that as an option, and probably some students who are interested in the upper grades wouldn't be able to take it. So what I calculated when I was looking at it is, we have 89 students this year enrolled in those three classes. It could mean a reduction down to 48 seats, and so you could potentially have around 40 or 50 students unable to take their computer programming and computer science classes. So that's of concern to us for sure. And then finally for me is science. Now, if you went back to that initial chart, science has already reduced by 2 FTE. In fact, in those last 3 years of decline, while science has reduced by 2 FTE, I think English went down 0.2, social studies went down 0.2, and world language went down 0.4. Science has really little to nothing to give. They are so full. But when we look at that smaller incoming ninth grade, it's possible the way that they'll divide into the honors biology and the physical science, you might actually be able to reduce by a section apiece. But when we move the students into the chemistry classes, it's looking like we need to add. Chemistry is the one class where we truly have a safety limit of 24 in a class. And so it looks like at best, and that might even be generous, that we could reduce by a 0.25 FTE. So on the next slide, that's why you see there's a lot of text there, because the impact of reducing beyond that is really significant. One thing you could do is potentially not offer AP chemistry. We've done that in the past. It's the fact that I'm not really sure where those students would go, because I think you'd also have to reduce the other APs, and so they probably aren't going to have a seat in any of that. It would be a challenge, I think, for us to schedule them. But other students who similarly are interested in AP Biology, AP Environmental Science, the Environmental Bio, and the Forensics, I would anticipate they'd all be oversubscribed, and you'd have to take students out of those classes. Probably would mean you can't run Human Biology, probably means you can't run Astronomy. That's why it's in bold. I think you just are clearly going to have a reduced availability for juniors and seniors to take classes.
We actually were up against the wall this year with science options for students. Every science course was closed. So we were pushing 27, 28. We would go back and forth. Could we put one more in? Because we had no more options for our juniors and or seniors that wanted that additional science credit, which is unfortunate because we had cut so much.
And if we had to go looking, we currently have one of our science teachers teaching EMT, so I think it would come into the conversation whether we offer EMT or not, so that we could actually offer our juniors a science course. So this one seems highly problematic and unreasonable. So.
Okay, and our last, second to last, when we look at our counseling department and we look at caseload, a little bit more straightforward, because we could take our projected enrollment and divide by the number of counselors. We currently have 5 school counselors and 1 director of counseling. Our director of counseling has a limited caseload, and Paula could explain why, the other parts of that job, and that's where I do think it's important that you hear the 504 numbers and parts of that that job that fills even beyond just a caseload. So we are looking out next year and the year after as not seeing a clear-cut way to change that counselor load. When we project out 3 years, and we think, is that the time that we could reduce by a counselor? The reasoning behind that isn't so much to do with caseloads, because if you reduced by a counselor a year earlier, you'd have comparable caseloads, about 200 instead of 198. The difference would be, in a school of 794, we think we would be in a better position to absorb some of the roles the director wouldn't be able to fulfill if the director were to take a larger caseload. So I asked Paula just to share some of your responsibilities to explain to the board why we've set this up with 5 counselors and 1 director, and what that director is doing.
So as I mentioned earlier, the 01166, tracking for all of our graduating students, that's one of my responsibilities. I am the 504 coordinator, and I run between 168 and 180 504s annually.
Those are meetings to qualify students and to do an
Or
update?
meetings to do an annual review, to review their accommodation plan. I do all the evaluations for the department. I oversee the curriculum and expanding curriculum and trying to figure out how we shift what we do with our students to keep abreast with the trends and college. I do all the data collection for the department, including the Board of Ed presentations where I share the college information. Not only do I supervise the department, but I supervise the Career Center and the 2 counseling administrative assistants. I do all the scheduling, balancing, including gender balancing, IEP, and 504 balancing. And as you probably knew, 2 years ago, I was unable to actually complete that in a really appropriate way because we just had such a shortage in terms of other counselor days to help with my other work. Balancing counselor caseloads is a delicate job, and I will just share with you that, as Gina mentioned, and you've heard from Patty and Dave about case management with the IEP students, the counselors are the case managers for the 504 students. We currently have between 33% and 31%, that's like our range, the counselors have of either special ed and or 504. The 504 numbers are, they range between, some counselors have 30 504 students as their case management, some have, 22. So that is above and beyond, and I tried to balance that where I can. As you know, I do caseloads by alpha, but sometimes I have to tweak that. We currently have 126 students identified with 504s that are in the building, and we have 6. I maintain all of the 504s for students attending Fairchild Wheeler, AITE, any of the other magnet schools. I run those meetings as well because they're our district responsibility. I don't want to overburden you, but I do all the shadows with students who are contemplating private schools. I try to be the Vanna White to show them what Barlow has to offer, to try to keep them in district. I'm very pro about that. I meet with families when they have concerns or issues that they feel need to be addressed by an administrator, so I'm sort of that first line of defense before it gets to Jen, and Julie. I run crisis team meetings, all the admin reviews I attend when students want to do something other than what is typical or what is in our program of studies. I do all the registrations for students new to our district. And I maintain all of the transcripts for all of the students in the building, including translating transcripts for students who transfer into district. So a lot of that needs to be, measured based on what we offer and how I can bring those transcripts in. I'm a co-coordinator for testing, so I help organize PSATs and SATs and APs and all of those activities. That's probably enough to give you a general
It
sense.
was enough of a list for us to say, we are not anticipating reducing that position in the next 2 years, but again, would we consider it moving down? We could be in a better position to absorb that.
Gina, can I just add one
Then
thing?
Another response?
I just want, for the board to realize, 1 in 5 students nationwide struggle with a mental illness. Last year, we had 22 new referrals to 504. This year, as of January 1, we have had 18 new referrals to 504. So I, too, like what Patty has done, have done the longitudinal, taken the 504s that are currently in the middle schools and tried to project, and our numbers stay very constant with where we are now over the next 3 years. So just a little bit of information.
It's important, it informs our decision moving forward.
So maybe after budget season, could we do like a comp with like all the other districts to kind of get an idea?
504s?
Because I think we have kind of a hybrid model where we have our director doing tasks that maybe are not being done in other districts, because if you look at the ratios, it seems like other districts have higher caseloads. But again, just be helpful to understand, but thank you.
Sure.
I think that's great, thank you.
I have a comment with respect to counseling and wellness. Now, I know the public, really pleaded with the board and the administration to add an SRO to the school. And I know I've been hearing good things about what he has done for the school, and it's good to have the presence there, but could there be more synergy? I know there's already partnership with the counseling department and perhaps with the wellness, but could there be more formal responsibilities that he may have in the classroom? Because my understanding is that there is an educational component to that person's job, or they're an SRO for a reason, because they can educate in some capacity. So is there more we could be doing there? And I'm not just asking from a budgetary perspective, I'm asking more from a curriculum perspective.
So certainly, we enjoy our work with the SRO. The SRO doesn't take the place of a counselor, so there's different educational components. I know we've spoken in the wellness classes. There's a wonderful club that's growing that he has been the advisor of. We're not seeing it as a release of the burden in the counseling department as far as that kind of education goes.
Would it help with wellness, though?
I don't see, it
I don't
can't,
see
because
them-
he's not a certified teacher.
Yeah,
so it would
I
be
don't see
co-teaching,
them
but
as-
not, but it wouldn't give any relief in terms of scheduling.
He can enrich,
Budgeting,
but he
right.
can't.
But it's a different skill set, too.
Carol,
Yeah.
one of the things, just to address that, is that the counseling department and the wellness department have really formed a very tight-knit bond, and counselors are in the classroom with wellness teachers are making referrals to counseling all the time. A number of new initiatives have taken place over the past couple of years to try to help students become more comfortable with the transition into the high school and to get more familiar. As you know, counselors don't see their students on a daily basis, but the classroom does, so they go into the classroom. So there are a lot of things that are happening, trying to expand that and trying to decrease the number of students who are struggling with anxiety, trying to make it a more comfortable environment where they don't feel so overwhelmed.
And some of that is also, and that's another part of Paula's job, providing that outreach for families, and how do we get the families connected with the community services that are available.
Just a question on, can you explain the logic for why we're waiting out to 22, 23 for reducing down to 4 counselors with caseload bumping up to 34, as opposed to shifting that back 1 year and taking the counselor out earlier in 21, 22 and bumping their caseload up to about 205? Sure. 7 different, there's a reason I'm sure we're pushing that out and delaying that a year.
There is.
Caseload's going up significantly 3 years out. Why not do it 2 years out?
Right. So the reasoning behind that is when we're projected to be 794, we think that we may have the capacity administratively to pick up more of that big list that Paula just said as far as the director, because we don't see how the the director at that point would have to take on a larger caseload, so some of those responsibilities would have to shift. Waiting until we're in the 700s, 794, it would be even better to wait until we're 757 to then say some of those responsibilities that the director is doing could shift over, possibly to assistant principals, possibly to other administrators in our building. To make that move too soon, we're afraid we'd lose some of those important tasks, and we wouldn't be able to support all of those students. So we've thought about, just as an example, if the counselors were responsible for running their own 504 meetings, you didn't put all of that on the director. That's a big part of Paula's day. What you lose in that is a consistency in what qualifies for a 504 student. You lose the fidelity of that program, where Paula has a handle of what is going on in as far as accommodations go. When you separate that out and everyone does their own, there's a lot of room to not be aligned. So we've appreciated the alignment that's brought.
And then what in our reference group, what's the average caseload for some of the others? Just in advocating if we're bumping
For
up
other
too high.
directors?
Yeah, for the counselors.
School
It ranges. I haven't recently collected that data. When I did 2 years ago, it ranged anywhere from 170 to 200. A number of directors have no caseload. They're strictly administrative. I could get that information currently and be able to.
We could update it again, but that was what we.
Yeah, I didn't know if we're going to be pushing too much onto the counselors, and we should advocate for keeping that person out in year 3 if we're going to bump it up too much.
Probably get you that now.
All right.
When you look at the administration, we have put on this sheet all of our administrators, our department chairs, ILs, or our instructional leaders, our directors, and our supervisors. And you could go down in the projected 2021 year, the structure that we see. 1 assistant superintendent head of school, 2 assistant principals. We have 1 athletic director. He's supported by 1 assistant athletic director. We have a special education director / supervisor. We have 3 department chairs, 1 in special education, 1 in STEM, and 1 in humanities. 2 directors, that's the director of information technology and the director of school counseling. We have 7 instructional leaders. Our instructional leaders, we see a greater need for not reducing their going into next year. And part of it is the instructional leaders are picking up those random sections. They do that every year. They're doing it now. If we didn't have an instructional leader in science, we wouldn't be able to run human biology as a science elective this year. So we appreciate that flexibility of having them come in and out of the classroom. We also look to our instructional leaders as doing our curriculum vetting. This is work that Stephanie has been leading, that some of you, I think, may have been at the curriculum meeting, in looking at moving forward with the work that we've been doing here, that Stephanie is leading K-12, looking to that group to do that work. Moving forward, again, along the line of instructional leaders, just to highlight that, we enter our NEASC accreditation period. That starts this summer. We're getting familiar with the standards. It really began in earnest in the 21-22 school year. In the past, we have hired an outside person to come in and lead that work. We're looking at this now as an internal process, using our department chairs and our instructional leaders to take on those leadership roles, instead of, if any of you were here at the last accreditation, every 10 years a school gets accredited. And we have hired an outside person to come in over a series of years and lead that work.
So can you speak to the cost difference between occupying our other administrators or other leaders and what the cost was for the outside person to lead that? In other words, there's a trade-off there. You know, you're saving 10 grand, but you're losing 30,000 in time from other more valuable administrators who could be doing other things? Or is it an actual savings, or is it just a repurposing? That would be helpful to kind of understand that.
So Tom was here when we hired the outside consultants. When I was looking at it, and I didn't go into depth of over the course of years, but it was a different amount every year as the work went through. I think it was 30,000. It was
No, I think it was
over the-
10,000 a year. It didn't
I
go
can
up.
bring you that information so that we're not
Just
guessing
curious
of what
to
it
know.
was.
That's
Sure.
it. And not now, just,
I
yeah.
will, we have plenty of time to do that.
Curious to know. Yes.
There is also a real benefit for having that person be our department chairs and our instructional leaders doing the work, because they're
That's for
leading
sure.
that work with the school. So that would be our recommendation going forward. In our future, do we see the need for an assistant athletic director? When our number of athletes and our number of teams reduce, what we would like to look at, and we'll be looking at it more closely, do we not send an assistant athletic director to away games? Do we just focus on our games here? Do we look at a chaperone? So that is going forward in our administrative structure.
That would be helpful too, to understand that position better, because it looks like you're projecting losing a couple of teams. So how does that impact the whole program, and how does that impact what Mike does? Are you now scheduling buses all day long, or, I mean, how does that
Well,
work?
this is athletic director is paid like a coaching salary, so, you know, so what they do for me is, if we have, you know, say a football game, they're one of the people who do crowd control, help set up the game and whatnot, but also it allows me to get to other functions. So when we have something going on in the upper gym, so say this spring, boys volleyball in the upper gym, tennis on the tennis courts, softball on the softball field, you know, everybody's all over the place. I could have, you know, this is a athletic director down at the stadium with track while I'm up at volleyball. Or if I go during the winter, where I go to sometimes boys swim, or to gymnastics, or to ice hockey, which is all off campus, I need somebody here to make sure the freshman JV games are organized for basketball. I can't be in both places, so they serve that purpose. Otherwise, you know, I can't be in every place all the time.
And we have done out the financials there to say, is it less expensive if we had a chaperone? And we paid chaperone rates, and it actually was more expensive with all of those games and all of those teams. As the team size goes down, we would want to revisit that and again, look for that.
Okay, great.
So then we look at our almost to the end of this, and thank you for your patience and your attention as we're going through. We look at some items to keep in mind going forward, projecting out. So we look in next year as that bridge FTE, and I won't get into that. We heard Patty and Dave's presentation last year. We look at that as last year.
That's a while ago.
It was, I'm sorry. They call that Freudian. I am so sorry. Just 2 days ago of our out-of-class. We believe that the savings really justify that position, and we can talk more about that. We've spoken about the Math Center, and we had run that as a pilot at a no cost. We're looking to fund a math tutor, but use grant money to do that next year, so it would still be no cost to the district. We'd like to continue to get that data and those positive results. Another thing we can put down on our agenda for board presentations, we'd love to share with you the results of the Math Center and what that's doing to help our students. The following year out, we're looking to shift that math tutor. Maybe if it's, again, if the data is working and it warrants, do we start to ease that position back into the budget? Very similar to when we were growing and we did this with sports teams. They had to establish themselves, be self-funded, and then gradually they work themselves into our budget. And then we know we'll be asking for summer work in the 21-22 budget, because that's when our NEASC cycle begins. Somewhere in the spring, they'll meet with you and go through the entire new cycle. In 22-23, we know the added responsibility will be tracking that credit, that mastery credit, with 212 students. In some of the research that we're doing now, some of neighboring districts are using Naviance, which is a tool we already subscribe to track that. And then our full NEASC accreditation is in the fall of 2024.
So you'd be looking to expand the math center at some point? Is that what?
Perhaps, but I'm not sure. It's too early for me to.
Because you're funding it with a grant, and then it's going to budget and a grant, and then it's going just to the budget. So unless we have knowledge that the grant is going away, which would be helpful to know if the grant's only for 2 years and then it goes away, if we want to continue it, it's in the budget. Otherwise, it appears as though it's
They're
the
just
intent to grow.
projecting, right, not knowing
Right.
that they will get a grant.
To expand the program, right.
If the data warrants.
Or to make it stable and not rely on a grant to fund the program. So it might not be that it's going to cost more money, it's just that we would be looking, if it's a program we value and we can provide the data to say so, we'd be looking to move it into the budget instead of relying on a grant. And then the grant, if we still qualify for it, could be used for other purposes.
I have a kind of two-part question with regard to special education and the bridge program. So this, I'm assuming this doesn't contemplate the assistant superintendent of, sorry, I forgot the.
This
special
we did
instruction,
before
this
that
current
position
structure,
was
right?
even there.
So if the tri-boards do agree to move forward with that, how does any of this get impacted in the long term? No? Okay, then from a qualitative perspective, we think that structure can support the special education we deliver at Barlow? Okay.
So back in August of 2019, we were projecting out what our 2021 budget may include. And we talked about funding for bridge, funding for the math tutor, reduction in athletic teams, and we had mentioned basketball at that time. We talked about the utilization of cross endorsements, and you're going to see that in our budget very heavily in our use of cross endorsements. We also talked about looking at our framework, our SRO, our technology, security, and looking at an enrollment decline. So I wanted to add a slide about some ideas that we will be exploring going forward. So I mentioned earlier about using Naviance perhaps to track mastery credit. We want to revisit the scheduling committee work. We had a very robust scheduling committee 2 years ago that completed a 2-year study, so they've been working on it for quite some time, exploring variations of the schedule. So we know we'll be revisiting that work when we get to 757 students. Will we still have an 8-period rotating cycle? And so we'll be looking at that. We'll be looking to digitize the program of studies. That's work that Cheryl started when she first took over in the curriculum committee in suggesting that we try to do something where families could see when we're not offering classes, when we're rotating courses. That work has tied really nicely into the work that Stephanie's doing with curriculum, so that if our curriculum documents could connect to a program of studies, and so that's very exciting and work that you could expect to see updates on. Continuing to articulate our portrait of the graduate, our new NEASC now has new standards, so we want to make sure our vision and our mission are aligned to those standards. We also, that second to last bullet is an interesting area to pursue, and that's alternative ways that high schoolers can meet prerequisite assignments. So we'll be looking to work with Stephanie again in what are our K-8s and how do those standards align, where students could maybe meet some of those requirements in 8th grade that would allow them then to enter 9th grade and move on. And then we do know, especially from the feedback that the board gave us at one of our last meetings, exploring independent study, grade 10 AP offerings. Would that ease the schedule? Would that help students earn those credits in a different way? So those are some things we are exploring. That was amazing. Thank you. Before 10 o'clock, we do have one more slide because Todd had asked to share one more slide that I did want to share, and maybe Todd, you want to walk through the public and the board with these important dates.
Yeah, so this is for the budget process, just the list of meetings. These are also on the website. So just to refresh everybody, we have a couple of budget workshops coming up. We're actually in the next regular board meeting in February. We'll have the presentation of the budget. We more than likely will have some questions there. Probably not vote on the budget at that one unless we come to conclusions pretty quickly in that one. So we have the budget workshops the following 2 weeks to talk through it and then, try to get consensus and vote on it. And then we have the district hearings later on to actually approve it and get it out to town for referendum and voting. So just so people are aware of the process going forward. Just the beginning.
Great. And as we're preparing our budget, I guess I would just ask a final question. Is there anything that we should be keeping in mind as we go through our budget other than keep costs down?
I will open that. I was going to say we can keep that for board member comment, but I think now if people want to, provide guidance now, and we don't have to hold it for a board member comment. So we want to start on this side. If you have any comments, direction, anything before they come back to us at our next meeting with the actual budget presentation.
Well, I think there were a lot of thoughtful things to consider, and that we really want to make sure what we're doing is best for our students.
So I want to thank the team. It's been a lot of work. I really appreciate it. And from my perspective, only speaking for myself, the goal that we established, the board established for the administration, have a 3-year strategic plan, this is it. Thank you. So it's a lot of work. With regard to budget expectations, I would like to see it, and Mike keyed in a little bit more, and we talked about it in various committee meetings, is more of the, with regard to sports, I'm really sensitive to equity, and, and there is a cost component to it, and sometimes it's easier to phase out programs, but I'd like to be able to see a more detailed mapping of all the sports that we offer by individual sport, rather than just highlight a few that we think, in the administration's opinion, is easier to wheeze out. I'm not questioning the judgment. I just want to see that so that we can communicate to the public why we're choosing to choose what we're doing, and that we're not singling any particular thing out. So I would like to see that in terms of just total of 400 kids that or athletes that we have in year 5 or whatever it is. What's the makeup of that, and what the associated cost is? I would like to see that by student, and then percentage of what boosters are funding versus what the district is funding.
So from my perspective, there is a lot of inference out in the community of the expectation of a flat budget at a minimum, and that's not for me. That's just been out there. But I would encourage the administrators to push through my probing questions, but do what's right for the students. And, I apologize if sometimes it seems like I'm questioning you or skeptical, but my questions really are more for the public and for awareness, to create awareness so that everybody knows that we are doing our diligence. But again, what's our main objective here is our students, so I would say keep your focus on that as well. I did have a question that you don't have to answer now because I don't want to take us, it's too late, past 10 o'clock. But when we're talking about math and we're talking about pre-calc and you're talking about classes over 30, I'd like to better understand what your high water mark is. There's a high water mark, it seems like, in science, which is safety-wise. Is there some sort of high water mark as far as performance of students? And I guess it's a more complicated question for a different night, but I was also thinking about, like, can you run AP Lang and AP Lit concurrently? And I know they're different courses, I know all about them, but I guess what I'm saying is there a way that, is there a rationale that higher performing students can be more self-motivated and can excel in classes without as much direct instruction, that allows you to be able to keep more offerings? Because I think as we move forward, that's something that is going to have to come into play, and so if we could kind of look at that as well.
I just want to thank everybody for the thoughtful presentation. Clearly, we don't want to cut anything, but sometimes we don't have the money for everything. So thank you, and I look forward to the next information session.
Ditto, this is terrific, real good information. I hope we were all paying attention because we're not going to be asking any duplicate questions next time. Thank you,
There's a
everybody.
strong hint there. Ms. Dent. I would just echo what everyone else said. This was wonderful. I saw how hard you were all working when we had that curriculum committee meeting. The work is here, and I thank you.
And I'll just conclude again, thank you. I know you have put a lot of work. There's a lot of data behind here, spreadsheets and calculations, and a lot of magic that you do behind the scenes. So definitely appreciate that. I appreciate everybody coming back and giving us this thorough presentation. And I'm much more awake to absorb it than I probably would have been the other night, or the other year. So thanks for coming back and taking us through all this. From a directional perspective, from a budget, I'm going to reiterate Mike's point. Personally, being from Easton, I'm looking around a 0% of flat budget and below. If we can get there, it's a big shift to Easton this year with the population coming back to Easton from Reading. So whatever we can do to try to keep those numbers down would be appreciated. And I know you've got a lot of thought behind here, so you'll make whatever adjustments we need to on a thoughtful manner. Potentially if we need to get rid of some electives and move things around, I know you've got all the information behind it, and we can work through that in the workshops. So again, not looking for just take a bus out here. We're going to need some big dollars and do it in a thoughtful way, which I know you've got and you've started projecting out for us, so I appreciate that. All right, any other discussion, any other comments, anything else you'd like to add in on the...
Just, I do want to acknowledge that this is the culmination of many, many, many hours of speculation and collaboration, and they're tucking this in on their own work. So Jen and Julie, thank you for leading it, the department chairs, the rest of you, and Gina for coordinating it all. Great job.
Thank you. All right, we will move on into the next item, public comment. Any of our members of the public, please come to the podium again. Name and address.
Hi, my name's Reed Gray, 15 Lone Town Road. I just have a few clarifications of things that came up. There was a question of what colleges require. You might have seen my wife the other day, Tuesday I think it was, with the book of 380 whatever of the best colleges and all those tabs. And my daughter read a list that was just some of those schools. All of those schools require 3 or 4 years of the same language. So if you take 2 years of Latin and then switch to 2 years of French, forget it. You can't, you're not getting in there. So I just wanted to clarify that because that question came up. There was a prediction of 13 Latin students next year. I'm assuming that presumes that all the kids in middle school can't take Latin next year. I don't know if that's the case, but if only one senior is graduating. My daughter, who you heard from earlier, who's in middle school, will definitely be taking Latin next year if she's allowed, and all her classmates would like to also. So
That prediction only was for the current students at Joel Barlow. We haven't been to the middle schools yet to do scheduling.
Okay,
So
well,
I just
you'll
wanted
see
to
that go up.
clarify that.
And to another point, there was a question about, where are all the junior Latin students? I think I know the answer to that. My daughters have told me over the years that a number of their friends have wanted to take Latin, and their parents have forbidden them because they told them the program isn't going to be there in a few years because it keeps coming up on the chopping block. If we would make a commitment to stop doing that, I think we would see Latin enrollment going up at a time when student enrollment in general is going down, because it's being unnaturally suppressed. It's not, and it'll bounce up, naturally to its natural number. I think it's not dying a slow natural death. It's being actively killed by this constant threat of chopping it. I understand all the other DRGA schools have Latin programs. If we would just commit to staying a first-rate school district and not having that threat out there, I think we'd be better off. I know that 8 years ago when we were looking at houses, in all these other towns, you heard from my wife about that, if I had seen that this district did not have Latin, I would think this is a second-rate school district, we're not interested, That's not just me, that's the market. So obviously you don't need me to belabor the reasons it's a bad idea to become a second-rate school district. So thank you.
Jeff Liggleman, Pocahontas Road, Reading. A few points. We've talked about this idea of a zero budget has come up. And I just did some back-of-the-envelope calculating here, and you can obviously correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you will. On a $24 million budget, right, 80% of that is $19,200,000, right, and that 80% represents people, right, costs, and there's built-in raises, right. So that at 2% comes to $384,000. The special education budget has been projected to increase 3.4%, which is $165,534. Add those two together, you get about $550,000, 2.3% budget increase, just back of the envelope. That's a maintenance budget, right? That's nothing new, no new programs, no new initiative, no investment, right? That comes in at 2.3%, right? To get to zero, you have to cut programming by over $500,000. Shaving down a section in a subject here or there isn't going to get you there, right? To get to zero and stay at zero, right, you'll have to hollow out the school, right? Cutting things such as art, music, and sports in total, right? That's just in 1 year, right? And then continue, again, to keep it zero, right? Bigger cuts about that size. So Barlow will no longer be Barlow. That's my point. Getting to Latin, right? Love in my heart. As I said a couple years ago, if we had just kept Latin 1, $15,000. I know it's $15,000. I don't minimize any dollar spent. I own my own business. Every dollar I spend comes out of my own pocket. I get it, right? If we had just done that for 2 years, that would have been 26 more students approximately in the program. It was 13 the previous year. I'm just guessing about 13 this past year. That would have been 26 more students. Putting Latin 2, as the suggested program suggests, right, again, makes it harder, right? So that makes it, these 8th graders want to come up, there's no place for them. So again, just makes it harder. That death by 1,000 cuts is pretty straightforward. So the programmatic cuts, as suggested by the document, don't allow current freshmen to finish, right? By the .4 cut, Latin is done, right, in 2 years, and freshmen who are in class now have no Latin teacher, right? Latin isn't a spoken language, right, you learn with Rosetta Stone, right? You need a teacher, okay? I've been involved in online education for 23 years. That's one of the few things I know about. Also, I'm concerned about the teacher herself, right? Like music, as we discussed earlier, you cut by .2, .4, you could very well lose the teacher, right? And I'm afraid the same thing's going to happen, right? My fear is that without proper planning and funding, our Latin teacher will leave and the program will then be canceled before your plan suggests, okay? While it may be your intention to allow students to continue their studies, they won't be able to without their teacher. So please make a plan, a specific plan, so that we'll know what to expect going forward, right? You certainly don't want me here meeting after meeting, right? And more importantly, our students deserve explicit reassurance that they can focus on their studies without having to worry about their programs being canceled outright or due to a teacher leaving. Thank you very much for your time and forbearance.
Hello, my name is Ava Basile. I live at 21 Sunnyview Drive. I am a Latin student in the 9th grade here at Joel Barlow. My sister is a Latin student in 8th grade at the middle school, and my brother would be a Latin student if it wasn't cut for him. So something I heard immediately tonight was that the program involving virtual language was some form of Rosetta Stone. When I hear Rosetta Stone, I think of something I can do in my home. I would prefer to take something meaningful, and when I think of Rosetta Stone, I think of something that, while it does have benefits, it doesn't provide as much learning or as much growth and development as an in-classroom environment would. I feel like if I can do it on my own time, it doesn't feel as, meaningful to me. I have been doing this language with taking a part of it in 5th grade. I've been learning this language for about 5 years now, and I have grown to love this language. It is a passion for me. For this to be cut would be ripping a part of me away. And of course there was the credits, Matt, the credit with everything, and only having the 3 credits would limit my abilities for college. And what I want to be. I want to be a vet. That makes it very hard for me to get into a good school. And we're learning, we just got our Latin and Greek roots for English Tuesday. And I'm already seeing connections between the language I'm taking now to what I'm learning in English. It's helping me. It's helping every Latin student that's in my class right now. Taking this is creating a disadvantage for us. And I don't think it's right, and I couldn't live with it. If I couldn't take Latin, I'd rather not take a language at all. Thank you.
My name is Carol Murray. I live at Sport Hill Road in Reading. I have 3 general comments. But first, I would like to thank all of you because the information provided was very, very helpful. And I can't imagine the level of detail that you had to go through to pull it all up to this level. So as a mom and a taxpayer, I really appreciate it. So thank you. 3 things kind of struck out, without getting into all the detail. First of all, it strikes me as a little strange that the state of Connecticut is now requiring 2 years of a world language. It's a new requirement because my understanding was language used to be in the humanities. That we as a school are cutting a language program while the state of Connecticut actually has now insisted that it is a requirement for graduation because I understand students previously could graduate high school without studying a foreign language. So that just strikes me in contrast. So why are we cutting an area of study when the state now has decided? So perhaps Latin isn't the right language to offer. But maybe there are others. I mean, I think one board member suggested if we have a bulk of students doing it in a virtual language lab, maybe it should be in a traditional classroom instruction. I think studies do show that language in general is better learned in a classroom environment than in a virtual lab. That's my first observation. Second observation is about AP classes. The cohort size currently at this school does seem to be naturally smaller than your average general education classroom size. Part of that is just it's a capstone class. Part of it is their scheduling conflicts because those same students, of however many students we have taking APs, there's probably one student who's taking 3 or 4 classes each year. So there's naturally scheduling conflicts that kind of artificially depress the size of those classes. I fully applaud allowing AP in your sophomore year. Not every class, obviously, some is sequentially impossible, but so many of the schools in all of the surrounding towns allow students to do that. So you may be actually able to generate a higher demand for your AP just because of a lack of scheduling issue or because some students are just ready to take it and they can afford to do it. I also kind of don't appreciate some of the subjectivity that comes back that, because it's a smaller cohort, it may not generate or deserve the attention it gets. People take APs for different reasons. It's not just to get in a good college. It's not just to get a 5 and get credits because you know what? Most of the big elite schools, they don't even give AP credit anymore if it's in your major. It's like, that's great. And you know why? Because if you want to study something in depth and you are a student who has identified that desire in high school, you should be taking as many courses as possible, not to get ahead in college, but so that when you get to college, it is not the first time you are exposed to that material. the pace and level at which college classes move is even faster than an AP class. I have a student in college. She took 2 years of every science, physics, chem, bio. She said basically after the third class, it was all new. So in no way in my mind should people be thinking that AP replaces the experience in college, but it augments, and I think it truly better prepares your students. So when they do take that course in college, it's not the first time that they're being exposed to that. The last thing, I have 25 years in financial services. Where is this 0% coming from? Because quite frankly, it's almost virtually impossible. I mean, if you're looking at a number, there's general inflation, there's salary inflation, there's real estate inflation. So why does education have to be the offset to all of those other categories? We live in an area where all those other costs are going up. So why does education have to make up for all of those other increases because you want to present a zero budget? I totally disagree with that philosophy.
Any other comments from the public? Very good. We'll move on. Board member, any other comments?
I just want to thank the public for commenting. I will make one comment with regard to what I'm personally struggling with regard to Latin. It's the only program, I believe, and I've asked probably countless times over the last 2 years, it's the only program that's only offered in Reading. So it's very difficult, and I think Mike kind of alluded to this comment in the last meeting. It's very difficult. We don't have a guaranteed pipeline of students coming into Barlow. And, I think, I can't speak for previous boards that I wasn't on, but I think that they're trying to preserve as much as they can, knowing that that pipeline wasn't there. And I don't necessarily, I don't represent Reading. I feel for the Reading folks, though, that have had kids in that, but Easton doesn't have it. So that's part of one of the things I'm personally struggling with. But thank you. I appreciate everybody's comments.
So just my comments, I don't want to create a illegal agenda item, but I just want to clarify. The suggestion of a zero budget is not something that originated here or anything that I'm advocating for. It's just something that's been out there in the community, and so I mentioned it, and I prefaced it by saying, please prioritize our students' needs. I'm just saying that it's out there. That was where that came from. Second, I think we all have made a commitment to support AP classes, even the smaller cohorts and the upper classes. Just trying to figure out if there's a way that we could deliver those services in a more efficient way moving forward, so that we can kind of ensure that we can hold on to them and retain them forever. And to all the Latin students, as I said last time, my children went through the Latin program as well, and I have been a big defender of it, and I think it's great that you come, and Jeff, you're wrong. We love to have you come every meeting. I don't have a problem with it. It gives us content on 78, but no, but I applaud you for coming out and expressing your sentiments to the board. We always want to hear from you, and what I will say to Cheryl's point is that it's hard if there's no pipeline, and that, it's got to be a community thing. It's got to generate, so that there's more students that are coming up, because, eventually it becomes to where, the trade-offs are too great, and that's the same thing when we talk about like a high-level AP class. Can you run an AP Lit class for 2 students? I mean, I think you always run AP Lit. That's my preference, but it's hard when you have 2 students. It really is hard to justify. You have to figure out an alternative way to try to make that available so that you can retain it. But that's really the challenge that we face, is to try and retain everything, because I think that's our commitment, is to make sure that we continue, that fabric that makes Barlow who we are. So I think we're committed to that, so. But thank you for coming out. We appreciate it.
I think I'm done for the evening as well.
I'm going to try to be brief. I don't think I can speak for every member of the board when I say that I don't think we predetermine anything. When we say we want to see sort of a zero budget, and I didn't say that, that was just other members of the board, that's our feeling about what the community wants when people say that. It is not our personal feeling about what we would do. Given world enough and time, I would support increased budgets every year. But we know that the community will not likely support that in these economic times. We don't want to take from education as opposed to other things. We want a robust education, and we need the community support to do that. So those of you out there who feel that we need an increased budget, you need to turn out.
Get your friends out.
Yep.
Second that. Again,
You need to turn out.
we need to turn out to vote for it, because again, anything above a zero is a $600,000 to $1 million increase to the eastern side. So
Right, and
We
and
know
I'll
that.
say, yeah, and
Concern.
I said I was done.
town support for that. We don't
I
want to
guess
cut
I'm
things if
not.
the towns come out and vote.
Yeah.
We're for that.
Well, we had somebody who came the other night and commented on, just talked about talking to her neighbors and explaining, what Carol's point was about just when you do raises and basic stuff, you are already at an increase. But that's something that isn't always readily apparent to somebody who just says, well, they've got 100 less kids. It's got to be, that much cheaper for them to do it. But, the more everybody can get out and explain to your curmudgeon-y neighbor why this happens and the realities of 80% of our costs being human, the better shape we'll be in.
And we don't predetermine anything. I just wanted that very clear.
Again, thank you. Thank you again for coming, putting in the thorough discussion and all the work behind it. We appreciate it.
Move to adjourn.
Have a motion for adjournment. A motion here, second, please.
Second.
All right. All in favor? Aye. All right, we are adjourned at 10:26. Thank you.